afternoon and welcome to the November 13th Clearwater City Council work session. It's good to be back here in the library, but we do want to again thank Pinellas County for allowing us to use their facilities. That came in very handy, and we appreciate their full support. That was a big job for some of their people, so we appreciate that very much. Let's start today's meeting with Marine and Aviation 2.1, please.
Final design presentation for the Beach Marina Replacement Project.
Hey, good afternoon, Council, Mayor. My name is Mike McDonald. I'm the new director for the Marine and Aviation Department. I want to introduce Nicole Pauley with Moffitt Nickel. She's the lead designer for the Beach Marina project. Back in October of last year, you guys gave us pretty good direction on where you wanted this project to go, and I think Nicole's done an excellent job of following those directions. So at this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Nicole.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Nicole Pauley with Moffitt Nickel, as announced.
Welcome.
And I'm here to give you guys an update on the Clearwater Beach Marina project. It was just over a year ago where we last met. And I'm going to start by recapping some of the initial project goals that we were given for this project about 2 years ago when we first started it. So, we were asked to replace the aging docks at the marina, which have reached the end of their serviceable life, to replace and modernize the marina utilities, to optimize the marina slip mix for modern vessel sizes, and adjust the layout and expand it to maximize the city-owned submerged lands, which extend to the south and to the east of the project, to provide opportunities for the upland storage and ticket kiosks for the structures and elements that were currently on the dock that will no longer be able to reside there, to activate Marina Walk by extending it further east, so taking Beach Walk and extending it east over the north side of the marina, and to reduce the congestion along Coronado from the passengers queuing into the street, sidewalk, sometimes the street, and to maintain commercial operations during construction, which requires phasing, and to continue providing boat slips for the water taxi in support of alternate transportation. One thing that was added after last year's presentation is that we also added a goal to replace and raise the existing bulkhead along the perimeter of the project. That has a few reasons that I will talk about. So as I said, we were given notice to proceed about 2 years ago on this project. We then proceeded with a master plan where we did a market study that informed the slip mix that we are using today. We also did some tenant outreach, and we did a commercial tenant survey and a couple of workshops with them to understand what was really important to the commercial tenants. We then proceeded on to 60%, 30%, and then we submitted 60% this summer, and we're in final design right now. We have our FDEP, environmental resource permit, and our stormwater exemption. We did the level 2 flexible development application for the DRC, and we were approved by the Community Development Board last month. We are ongoing with the Army Corps and Pinellas County right now. We anticipate both of those to hopefully be completed first quarter next year. We applied for 2 grants, the Sportfish Restoration Grant, which is for transient boaters, and the Tourism Grant, Pinellas County's, I believe, and we are in the process of working through those. If both of those are accepted, that could be several $1 million worth of funding for this project. So we're targeting the end of this month for a bid submittal, 90%, and the construction manager has been selected for this project, and they are preparing the documents to get ready to open the bid phase in the beginning of January. We'll be progressing the 100% design and going through building permitting throughout that process, and the plan is to start construction in May or June of 2024. When we last spoke, we talked about 4 project risks, and I just want to give updates on each of those. One of the big concerns was that the existing marina and to the south of the marina was located within the Army Corps Federal Channel. We did successfully deauthorize that spur in January of this year, so that is no longer a concern for this project. Parking reduction has been a continued discussion. We started with nearly 60 spaces that we're proposing to lose, and we've been able to reduce that to 38. We completed a parking study that does demonstrate that the existing parking lot will meet is code compliant under this new parking count. Dredge disposal is still an open item. We are continuing to look at opportunities to not have to handle dredge spoils on site, but to truck them to another location so that they are not in the way of parking or businesses. So we are working to get an authorization to move to a nearby park, handle it, and then dispose of it. And then inflation and supply chain issues was the last item. Luckily in the last year, we are finally seeing things stabilize a little bit, but this has continued to plague projects and continues to in the marine world with hurricanes and stuff taking so much of the active contractors around right now. Prices are still staying very high. The project area on the water side has not changed, but on the upland, we've actually pulled back some of that scope. And so you can see the areas in blue. That's where we are no longer impacting that area. We're focusing this project strictly to the water's edge, the promenade, and within. And this is the layout. This is the alternate layout that we presented last year at council called the hybrid alternative. We started with an all-floating dock layout, but we have revised it to a fixed dock commercial boardwalk along the perimeter. This was something that the commercial boaters highly desired, and it also allows to have a wider continuous sidewalk and connectivity from the land side to the water side. This was the selected concept and the one that we've been progressing forward. I think you'll see that we stayed very close to that as we move forward towards final design. So as of 4 weeks ago, this was the final marina site plan. Very little has changed from that point. I don't have it rendered in pretty colors, but you can see that the thick black line represents the bulkhead replacement. This was a change to the project after last year. The bulkhead is old, and it is planned for replacement in 5 to 10 years, and the decision was to move forward with that now from a construction sequencing standpoint, because if you don't replace it now, then the commercial boardwalk and all of the activities around it would need to be interrupted to replace it in the future. These bulkheads are sold directly waterward. We'd have to cut out a swath of the construction that we had just constructed. So that has been designed as a replacement, and then the fixed docks are shown in gray. Those are the commercial docks for the commercial tenants, and then the floating docks are the 4 white dock trees. Those are continuing as floating docks as originally planned. Looking at the uplands, there are 2 focused areas of the upland with the marina building in the middle of them. So the west side is the West Plaza. That has 10 ticket kiosk buildings with 20 total ticket kiosks. There is shade and seating and landscaping, hardscaping all along this area to really activate this area. Then moving towards the east, we're carrying all of those elements forward, but in a slightly closer footprint to the water's edge. We are also incorporating 2 EV charging spaces, and we're provisioning for an additional 2. And then there are day docks on the far east side of the project. In those day docks, there's going to be 2 electric boat charging, DC fast charging stations there. On the water side, you can see the commercial is shown in magenta along there. We just covered that. The recreational are the 3 floating docks in the center. And then on the east side, we have a multi-purpose dock, and that's going to continue serving the fuel building, and that line should extend a little further south. Day docks on the right side, and then the rest of that dock will be seasonal and transient, except for those 2 spaces at the very north. Those are designed for 55-foot slips with the idea of the water taxi occupying those, the little extra space to move around upland. This shows the marina circulation route We're focusing the access to the docks to 8 isolated locations. That's allowing us to control the pedestrian access. They're very wide entrances, comfortable, but that's allowing us to give 2 of those entrances off of Coronado on the north and the south side with a railing in between. So that'll prevent the queuing of pedestrians to be able to happen any further west than that area. And then we've got connectivity to the pedestrian crossing to the north, as well as the bike trail and the underpass to the east. This also shows off to the right the day docks and the water taxi, and that there's an ADA compliant path that brings them up on the east side of the marina so that they walk the whole length and experience Marina Walk. Part of the project is maintenance dredging. I just put this in here so you guys got an idea of where we're planning on dredging. This is mostly in the commercial boat areas where it's silted in around the perimeter. And these are a few images of the Marina Walk. This is the West Plaza area. The bottom center image is as you approach the marina, and then if you look to the right, you see Coronado, and to the left, you see the kiosks and the shade structures and everything on Marina Walk. There should be plenty of seating, shade, and space for serving as both a promenade and a plaza space. As you continue to the east, these are some images of what this is intended to look like, continuing the shade structures and the kiosks and the boardwalk as we go east. The destination node on the far east side is intended to be a seating area and an art opportunity, just to continue drawing people to the east. The buildings related in this project are the ticket kiosks, which are intended to be brightly colored with a Florida vernacular, and the fuel office, which is on the floating dock on the east side of the project, and that is set up more for the compressed footprint but oversized roof edge, eaves to allow for protection from rain and the elements. So we first went with the hybrid alternative. We did that cost estimate following the master plan. The project was at $28 million. Through recent changes and evolution of the project, we are now at $34.6 million. We can talk in more detail about that in the Q&A. And I'll conclude with a summary of where we're at in final design. So the marina does maintain the same slip count and balanced slip mix that was always desired. The commercial boaters do remain docked along the perimeter of the marina, and they now have fixed docks. We will still use floating docks for the remaining non-commercial end users, which is typically a resilient and desirable amenity by most boaters. We are raising the bulkhead by 15 to 18 inches to meet the minimum cap height requirements, and after the last storm that went through, this seems like this was a good decision. We're also moving the docks up to 15 to 24 inches depending on where you are at in the marina. And so all of the dock access is going to come in at the bulkhead height, at the top of the height, about 15 to 18 inches higher, and then it'll step down at some locations to allow for the boarding heights of some of the smaller boats. Marina Walk does extend Beach Walk, I think with the intended results of providing shade and seating and kiosks. The facility is ADA compliant in accordance with the ADA guidelines for recreational boating facilities, which have been adopted by the Florida Building Code Accessibility. And we have added both electric vehicle charging stations and electric boat charging stations to the project. That's our update.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Yes, sir.
Yes, David.
A couple questions. In this dock configuration, is there anything planned for the ferry?
Yes, sir. We can go back to the slide that shows the whole.
The water taxi corner.
So right there in the blue area, on the screen on the top right. Those two slips are for the Clearwater Ferry.
Okay. I don't know if we've, I know I'm on the Waterborne Transportation Committee, and we talked about a different size ferry boat eventually. I know we had plans for that. Are these expandable in case we do go at one point to a bigger ferry?
How much bigger are you guys thinking?
Well, nothing's been planned yet, but something between what we have now and the Cross Bay Ferry.
I do not recall, I know that our current agreement with Clearwater Ferry, they're looking at some different ferries, and I'm not sure what their vessel size is. I know it didn't, when we discussed that, I know it didn't trigger me to think of this, so I think we're still within the footprint of what they're looking at, but I'll double check on that.
I'll try to get you some of that. We're having another meeting coming up, so
Correct, yeah.
I'll try to, before we get started on this, get that information to you.
Correct.
And my other question was, okay, we're doing this not in phases, right? We're just going to do it like,
We're doing it in 2 phases. We're going to build the west half first and then the east half so that you have some ability to move the existing commercial boaters over to one half.
okay, that was my concern, because I know we had talked about before doing some kind of mooring thing, and I didn't know how that was going to,
Yeah.
be for the commercial boaters.
So for the first phase, we're going to utilize the fuel dock that's there now for the commercial fleet. I have crews that are repairing it, making it suitable for the loads that are going to be on that. And then after the west side is made, we're going to move everybody over to the west side.
That makes more sense, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for that presentation. Wanted to start by saying thank you for putting EV charging in and looking forward with electric boat charging too. That's fantastic. I have a question, so I'm ignorant about some of these words, but on page 7, you've got bulkhead replacement, this black line that goes, all the way from Coronado all the way down. Is a bulkhead, like you mentioned, 15 inches? Is it a wall?
It's a
Seawall.
seawall. It's a more.
So it's right on the water, not in the middle, because this looks like it's in the middle, but it's on the water? The bulkhead's on the water?
It does look like a couple lines got shifted in a few of these, so I think possibly,
Okay, so bulkhead means seawall.
yes, it's synonymous with seawall, and it'll be installed directly waterward of the existing wall in they call it, a direct replacement of it, so in the same footprint, but just waterward.
Okay, so if you can pull up like page 9, because I'm most concerned, one thing,
Which
I,
one is
page 9 on your, I'm sorry, 7 on your presentation, but I bike through there very frequently and have to get off my bike and walk through all those kiosks areas on Coronado. So I want to understand that. So you've got a bulkhead, but then you have these dock platforms, right, that come out. So the bulkhead is here, but then the dock abuts it. So the bulkhead isn't on the water, but any water that splashes up on the dock goes to the seawall, right?
Yes,
Concrete?
all of the commercial boardwalks are on the water side of the wall.
Okay. And then Coronado, if you can show me what Coronado looks like, what slide best? I kind of think it's number 11, if we're
Yes.
looking on the top right one, correct? So that we're getting rid of all the foot traffic for kiosks on the Coronado stretch.
Correct, and
That's
there'll be a
fantastic.
railing that runs that whole length. There'll be a small access at the south side because it would be a really long walk to walk up and around, but there'll be a small access there, and then the bottom center image there, if you're looking to the right, that's looking down Coronado.
Okay,
So it'll be completely unobstructed from anything related to the marina.
great. And about how wide is that sidewalk or walk area going to be? Do you think like 8 feet?
Coronado will be the full width of, we're not making any modifications to that. The boardwalk that is on the on the water side as a minimum width of 8 feet at the tightest locations, but as you see, there's actually widened sections to allow the boats to pull in at an angle, so there are wider areas that expand to give you more space to work.
Okay. I'm thinking about people walking along the sidewalk right next to the road. How much space are they going to have strollers and wheelchairs and walk? Because right now it's super narrow.
It's basically what it is right now, except you're not gonna have kiosks, you're not gonna have people standing there. And then where the bulkhead is gonna be higher, 18 inches, and then there's gonna be a gate that runs along there. And then, of course, there's that wall that runs along Coronado.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
So there's no way to widen that footprint, where people can actually walk.
So the very southern end by the Pier 60 Hotel is, it would require changing the alignment of the road
Okay.
to widen that,
Yeah.
I believe. So that was not in our scope, but we did take everything off of it.
Yeah, so people
in a
shouldn't be
way.
bunched up there.
right. But there's also two ways to go. You can walk through Coronado, or on the south side, there's an opening, and they can walk along the docks up to that area.
Loop around. Good, that's good. And then shade structures, you've got more shade structures along the walkway inside. Is there a possibility to affix those with solar or anything?
Not really. I mean, without doing hard structures that you can mount solar on top of.
Okay, so these look curved like it might be fabric, and that's what they are?
It is. It's a fabric that can be removed, so the structure is designed for building code wind speeds, and then this fabric is removed.
Okay. And then, do you have any plans, so we're going to connect it to Beach Walk, which is across Coronado? Any kind of aesthetic plans to tie it together with, art or sculpture or visuals that bring people, like it's an extension of Beach Walk now?
That is the idea, so that walkway as you're walking up, right now that white piece is just intended to serve as a potential art location. So the art has not been selected yet for that. And then we also expect the signage as we walk up to be very similar to Beach Walk. But we should be meeting with art soon, with the art committee, to start working through those details.
Because we have that sculpture that's right there at the corner. It says Beach Walk.
Yeah. We had a monument sign in there just temporarily before, but since it hadn't been vetted, we removed it at this point because we don't want to convey something different than the city wants. But I think that was our vision.
I think that's all I've got right now, thanks.
Okay. Yes.
Just like you had hinted before, if you can just go through, what was the cause of the increase from 28 to 34 million for the project? What accounts for that increase?
If you want to go to that page. The dredging component is going to be more than what we originally estimated. Doing the seawall now rather than in 10 years was a component of it. And, these are just estimates, and these are just based on the inflation and the continuing rise of the construction costs. So we'll have once we do the bid submittals and we get the guaranteed maximum price, that's when we'll know for sure. But we're hoping that these estimates are high, and it's not going to be more than that.
Thank you.
Anything else on this? For the city manager, and I know, when we're speaking with the TDC about possible funding for some of this stuff.
Yeah, so we've already met. Initially, the county administrator asked us to do a pitch to him, so our team went and did that. It was received very well, and we are waiting to hear back from the county administrator in terms of what the next steps are.
Great. All right. Thank you. Great report. We look forward to it coming to fruition. All right. Thank you very much. Let's go to 2.2, please.
Approve a proposal from engineer of record Moffett and Nickel for the design and permitting of the Clearwater Harbor Marine Wave Attenuator Project.
Good afternoon again. Mike McDonald, new director of Marine and Aviation. These are the 3 wave attenuators that were damaged by Hurricane Ian. We're in the middle of doing the Marina 25-year master maintenance plan. So Ian came in, so we had the damage assessment done on it. There was more extensive damage than was already there. So water has actually gotten into these and they're listing, and they need to be replaced. In order for us to do that, we got with FEMA, and we are eligible for FEMA funding for this project. And then we're also working with our insurance carrier. The design is going to be comparable to what you've already approved on the North Basin and the South Basin with the columns being in the center. It's going to mitigate, future storm events.
Great, okay.
I'll be happy to
Any questions or comments on this
answer
item?
any questions.
Yes.
What are your expectations for the amount from FEMA or insurance to help pay for these?
I couldn't answer that. I know that insurance for the North Basin Wave Attenuator was a little over $200,000. And then FEMA, I think we're still waiting for some reimbursements from them, but I want to say it was in the neighborhood of $400,000 for the FEMA, for that project. So,
Anything else? Consent?
Yes.
Thank you. Economic Development, 3.1, please.
Approve the substantial amendment to the City of Clearwater's fiscal year 2021-2022 annual action plan.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Denise Anderson, Economic Development and Council. So as stated in the agenda memo, this is the second substantial amendment to the fiscal year 21-22 annual action plan. And since the home ARPA allocation from HUD was noticed during that fiscal year, all plans and activities will end up being tied back to fiscal year 21-22. The agenda memo describes what changes are being made, and the attachment shows in red line format the details of those changes. The first substantial amendment, which was approved in June of 2022, established the initial home ARP allocation plan, but since then, Blue Sky has been withdrawn, as you know, and new and revised guidance has been issued by HUD. So previously, the allocation plan identified specific organizations and their funding amounts. This amendment adds new, broader categories that allow greater flexibility as we move forward. This is important because we have until September 2030 to spend these funds. This is a one-time allocation. So Councilmember Beckman and I had the opportunity to talk about this a little bit this morning, and she had a number of questions regarding the content of the document, so I'll address some of those before we head into Q&A. The home ARP allocation plan uses language like may or is likely when referring to needs or gaps that exist in the community. And I spoke with our HUD consultant on this, Amanda Warner with Wade Trim, and I should note, Councilmember Beckman pointed out some gaps that appear in those tables as well with terms like NA. So in talking with her, she shared with me, confirmed with me that HUD requires that we identify federal sources of data. So if the data is not available at the federal level, and this includes our annual point in time count, which is submitted to HUD, we cannot use that data. So if the data doesn't exist, it's not in those tables. Secondly, using words like may or is likely to exist is not suggesting that there isn't real or persistent or increasing needs out in the community. I think we all know and recognize those. But using those phrases gives us the opportunity to be flexible, again, as we move forward in the next 7 years, six years, to spend these funds, having that flexibility so that we can move funding among the various program types is really important, because it's very difficult to anticipate needs, and I think COVID is probably our best example of those things, right? So another question that she asked me this morning is how much we have spent of this $1.64 million, and that's a really great question, and I actually misrepresented that this morning, so it's important that we talk about it. To date, we have spent just $27,000, which is, yes, Councilmember Bunker, it is startling. So I dug a little bit deeper. So as I said, this is a new and one-time funding source, complete with its own rules and regulations. So much like CDBG or home or SHIP, once a new funding source is created, then all the stuff comes in, right? So initial guidance in 2022 has since been amended, as I stated earlier. Additionally, implementation training is just now getting underway. They've never had a class on how to implement this. The first classes are beginning this week. And though I am certain it seems though we're being very slow, believe it or not, we're a little bit ahead of pace in comparison to other jurisdictions. So let me explain why that is. As I said, guidance has been slow in coming. Implementation has been even slower because the guidance is slow in coming. And what we do not wish to do ever is to put dollars out there that does not comply, right? And so until we know fully what that compliance looks like, it's very difficult to expend those funds. And the risk of doing that is, for instance, if we were to go out there and spend funds that are not compliant with the regulations that have just sort of been inked with final guidance, we would be at risk of returning general fund to HUD for federal funds that have been misspent, not in compliance. So while speed is always important in terms of how we serve our community, in this respect, it is not recommended. In fact, I would ask that we be particularly cautious with a new funding source. Finally, Chuck had the opportunity to make a couple of phone calls on my behalf today, and he spoke with the county and with St. Pete. Neither of those jurisdictions has spent a dime of their money either. And county added that they recently attended a national conference, National Community Development Association, and in that room of hundreds of people nationwide, only 4 jurisdictions were able to raise their hand and say that they have spent the money. And again, this is because guidance has been very, very slow, and training for the implementation of this is just now rolling out. So I can appreciate the patience and the surprise and dismay that we've not spent those funds, and while I share some of that, of course, when you do dive in a little bit deeper, it is important that we get it right, not that we get it fast. Happy to take any questions.
Questions or comments on this item?
Thank you. Thank you for following up on that.
Very welcome.
Those critical data points. And it's shocking to me that you're reporting that St. Pete and the county has not spent their money either, which is probably, at least the county has millions more than ours. If we have 1.6, St. Pete and the county have many more. So what I find interesting is that as we talked this morning, the initial guidance, so we did get this money before June of 22, correct? And then you had the First Amendment in June of 22.
Right.
And so,
I should clarify, we don't actually get the money. These are always reimbursements. So
okay, reimbursements. Okay, so we're not earning interest on it. It's not like the ARPA funds that we earned interest.
Correct.
Okay. So in your summary, though, it says that the $1.637 million is HUD requires these Home American Rescue Plan funding to be used to assist qualifying populations defined as, and I just want to know if this has changed. Qualifying populations defined as populations experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness and others requiring supportive services or assistance for homeless prevention. Has that changed at all?
No, that has not. To my knowledge, that has not. I don't know if that changed from its original definition, but that is the current definition.
Okay. So when I look at that and I look at our 1.6 million, and granted there may be some more guidance, but I mean that's pretty black and white. People who are experiencing homeless or at risk of homelessness, and supportive services that people need. We need to get that money out the door, especially because it was allocated, we're all here, but COVID hit, March 19th, on March 20th of 2020, right after we were elected, everything shut down. And so the federal government allocated those funds in response to the pandemic to be used to respond to what people were experiencing. And so, this isn't off on you or anything, but so here we and other major jurisdictions, regionally every one of them except 4, are sitting on these funds that were supposed to deal with people struggling through COVID with these parameters. So we've got all of it still there except for 27,000 or so, you said, right, that we spent.
Correct, and that's been spent on planning. And
So that's just administration.
Right.
So these monies have not touched one person experiencing or at risk of homelessness or for services to wrap around.
That is correct.
Okay.
I should point out, however, of this 1.6 million, that is just of this 7.2 million that we have received tied to COVID funding. So recall, we received CDBG CV1 and CV3. CV2 is actually pass-through monies that went to the state, known as CRF funding, if you were looking at our funding sources, if you will. And then, of course, the ARPA Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. So in total, that's $7.2 million. So I would suggest to you that certainly CV1, CV2.
Which is coronavirus, right? So we're,
Coronavirus, right. That CV1, CV2, and the pass-through funding that I referenced, CRF, that was all approved under the CARES Act, I believe. And then the American Rescue Plan Act allocated the ARPA, Local Fiscal Recovery Funds, and these home ARP funds, which of course came later in '21. So the CDBG CV is very similar in that it largely public services, right? That's where all those dollars went. In fact, those sort of competed with our usual allocation of CDBG funding for public services and facilities. It was sort of competing funding, if you will. Typically, they went to all of those same nonprofits that you all are familiar with that we bring forward every year in our public services and facilities allocations plan. And like City of Clearwater, not being able to attract and hold employees because of a tight labor market, nonprofits, of course, are facing those challenges as well. So a lot of this is dealing with capacity issues at the nonprofit level, too.
are there restrictions on the funds being able to be paid for personnel at those nonprofits? Because you're saying that it's capacity. I agree it's capacity. I know all those social service funding agencies need people. They can't afford to pay people. Could some of these funds be used for their salaries?
If you look at one of the tables in the home ARP plan, you'll find that we're not actually allocating for operating funds of nonprofits. And this is pretty much in line with the conversation or concern that you expressed to me this morning, that we're recommending 15% allocation for administration and planning of city staff. And your concern that you mentioned this morning is that these contracts that we would bring forward under the home ARP plan would include a similar sort of set-aside for their operations and staffing. In fact, it appears, according to this table, and I would need to dive in a little bit further to confirm this, it doesn't appear as though we're setting aside funding for those purposes.
That they're not allowed to use those funds for?
Well, I looked at one of the tables, and again, I have to confirm it. I looked at one of the tables, and I can send you all a note separately which table I'm referring to. It doesn't look as though we're allowing an allocation for operating and salary expense. And that, I would presume, is to ensure that the funding actually gets out into the community.
Okay, so that might be a problem. I mean, and we don't need to get into micromanaging here, I guess, but I think, I need to understand this. As chair of the COC, I need to understand this. As a person who's out in the community advocating for more housing options, I need to understand. We have, for our size COC, we have the most homeless veterans in the nation for our size of COC, coming right out of Veterans Day. The other thing is we have years-long wait list for adequate housing. And our point-in-time count that you referenced, we have about 5,000 homeless individuals in Pinellas County, and about 3,000 are children who are housing insecure and waiting for family shelters. So I know that organizations need 10 to 15% of those grant funds for administrative. My question was, if we're taking 15% off 1.6 million or whatever for administration and planning, and then, if we're allocating these grants to these nonprofits, St. Vincent de Paul, Hope Villages, HLA, HEP, all that stuff, they need capacity too. But when you acknowledge the truth of the matter, it's like 30% might be gone for administration out of the funds that don't really touch the people. So I don't know if that's your call about whether or not funds can be used for administration to our providers, but I would advocate that they should be able to. How else are they going to get capacity? How else are they going to maintain employees?
So I'm looking at a table, and it's on page 12 of your home ARP allocation plan, one of the attachments. And it indicates that the statutory limit for operating and for capacity building is 5%. So the most that we could provide, our recommendation is 0.
Well, don't you think you should have some money for them to have capacity and operate? We need it. We are taking 15% just to send out grant things, you know, and
I'll double
oversee.
check. I'll double check to see if within the organizations themselves, if there's a component for that. That's not a question I happened to ask this morning, so I'll find out.
Okay. And then when we talked a little bit about this public notice that went out for changing these funds, you know, you've got homeless empowerment program, $292,500, the HLA, $46,000, Hope Villages, $134,000, St. Vincent de Paul, $50,000. I asked you, did you put a cap on what people could ask for those funds?
No, we did not.
Okay, so they could ask, sky's the limit?
They could, I think within the CPD notice, which stands for Community Planning Development, Community Planning and Development, it's a HUD term. Within the notices that came out, when we did a solicitation for applications, we asked our sub-recipients or those requesting grants that they reviewed that CPD notice. It's clear that they were confused about the CPD notice and confused it with other public services. We'll have to revisit those applications at this time. And again, this is in part because of evolving sort of regulations. And it's not all that dissimilar to other legislative acts we see, whether it's at the state or federal level.
Okay, and then on this page, again, the public notice where we have, you know, the went to and from. So when we have these dollar amounts in parentheses, so again, homeless empowerment program, $292,500, and then in the far right column under change, increase or decrease, you have a decrease of $292,500. So were they allocated that amount and they didn't receive it?
In our last subrecipient, June of '22, we had anticipated entering agreements with them based on the applications that they submitted. Those were the funding amounts that they requested, and that's what went into the home ARP allocation plan. Again, with changing guidance, we determined that it's much better practice to make broader those categories, so that we have the flexibility to increase or decrease based on performance, how well they're doing, those that they're serving, et cetera. So every single one of those dollars that are identified within there, I can't promise you that that's what's going to be allocated because they're going to be required to submit revised applications. But all of those could be funded under either supportive services or tenant-based rental assistance. Like Hope Village's initial application would qualify under tenant-based rental assistance as an example. So we're actually increasing funding allocations within those two by removing the $875,000 under Blue Sky, and now under affordable rental, you'll only see $500,000 allocated for that. And that's really because we have all those other funding sources that can typically go toward housing. And CDBG, as you know, historically is the only one we can use on services, but for these special types of funds.
So I think the ask is, are we going to broaden the services definition, right, and not make it narrow here? And are we going to reach out then to all of these partners and say, please resubmit and the sky's the limit? Please understand the sky's the limit. I've got 1.6 million here, minus the administration.
We have $691,938 allowed in supportive services based on this recommendation, and $200,000 in tenant-based rental assistance.
Okay.
So to say the sky's the limit would not be an appropriate statement.
But please, you know, what do you need?
Certainly, but they'd also have to show us how they intend to spend it. It's not just what they need, it's how will they expend those funds.
And then, can you just spend just 1 or 2 minutes, I mean, you touched on it, but it's about, as we read this plan, when we read this plan here, on the document, that this is where you alluded to the gaps, and it's stating that some of these needs gap analysis on page 6, we don't have anything filled in there for any needs, current gap in emergency shelter, transitional housing, permanent supportive, sheltered homeless, unsheltered homeless. So that seems to be kind of incomplete. And it's just some of this phrasing that I find page 8 and 9. In Clearwater area, homeless services such as emergency shelter and transitional housing are provided by churches and nonprofit organizations. And, you know, you've got the database connects the Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority route maps. Information regarding homeless resources is also disseminated through Tampa Bay Cares hotline. And, you know, also, there is a wide array of existing homelessness prevention services available in Clearwater, including, you've got counseling, legal assistance, mortgage assistance, rental assistance, utilities, blah, blah, blah. But they're all inadequate. They're all not adequately funded. There's a wait for every single one of those. And so I think, you know, part of it is let's make sure that the language is accurate if we're updating this. On page 9, Clearwater has a robust shelter, housing, and service delivery system for those individuals experiencing homelessness and who are at risk of becoming homeless. Some identified gaps may exist, including sufficient funding to support the volume and reach of homeless supportive services, you know. But again, that's where you mentioned some gaps may exist, but they truly are gaping gaps.
So what I would suggest that you consider within this language, this is effectively, even though the allocation has already been made, this is our pitch to the federal government that we have a system in place. It is robust. I'm not suggesting that it serves every need at every moment. It is robust. It exists. We utilize it. We're engaged. And that we recognize there is need, and we have a plan to spend that. So I would ask that you kind of keep the context that this is sort of like a grant application, even though the allocation has already been made to the city, if you will.
Okay. I can buy that. Again, I think, you know, page 10. Based on reported numbers, there are currently sufficient shelter beds for those populations experiencing homelessness. But there aren't. Yeah.
The gap certainly is within family shelters, by and large. Not suggesting that every night somebody that needs a bed that's not related to a family unit has that bed available to them. Certainly, but we are one of 5 jurisdictions within the county, and you know, we all have a role in placing appropriate resources where they're most needed. So I recognize that you're frustrated with the language. All I can suggest to you is that that language is necessary in order to provide the flexibility that we need to be able to expend these funds appropriately.
When do we expect that we're going to expend the rest of the funds, 600 and some? And reach out to these providers again, or maybe are we going to invite other providers as well? Like
of course, we will. Yeah, keeping in mind that the first training on implementation is just now becoming available this week. I don't even know if we made enrollment this week, to be honest with you. But that training will take some time, and while this is going on, we're also crafting new subrecipient agreements. It's subject to many of the federal regulations we're most familiar with that are within our subrecipient agreements for CDBG and other documents, but it requires a thorough review of all new federal regulations as well that come out and have to be incorporated into a subrecipient agreement. We'll be reaching out to other jurisdictions. I have no problem stealing their best practice in order to create those subrecipient agreements, but that is part of this process as well. And then finally, we'll have to do policies and procedures. Because this is a brand new funding source, albeit one time, we have to establish written policies and procedures for expending the funds. It's important that this will not delay our use in that, but in short term, we have to have those documented as well. So while I wish it would be easy, very rarely do we find that with a federal source of funds.
So I think what it does is for me, it emphasizes the importance of the jurisdictions meetings that are continuing with the COC.
Yeah.
I mean, learning from each other, all the entitlement, right?
Yeah.
And so it's critical that we keep that going, learn from each other, streamline, and get the money out the door.
Indeed. To answer your question, though, more specifically, I hope in the first quarter of next year we'll be again to roll those dollars out, but at this point I can't tell you for certain that that's going to occur. Depends on the training.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes.
So basically, in a nutshell, this is a pitch so we have to use appropriate verbiage. You can only use federally vetted data for this pitch. And implementation, it's paramount that it will be done correctly. So that's the hindrance. Is that in a nutshell what it is? Thank you.
Anyone else?
Mark
Yeah.
does.
Okay.
I mean, it's not just shocking, it's maddening at how slowly government works. And we forgot to tell the homeless people, don't be homeless
Exception
until we
provided
get this
here, of
on.
course.
What's that?
Exception here, of course.
Of course. You know, we've got to do better, because to the folks in the community, they just think we don't care. And as much as we want to do something, there continue to be all these setbacks.
Yeah, money does flow. You know, those other federal sources that I mentioned, CDBG 1, 3, the state passed through CRF. CRF has been fully expended. We had the best audit in the world following the expense of that. It was framed on my wall. But the CV, we've spent about 86% of those tranches. And the ARPA allocation, local fiscal recovery funds of $3.3 million, I should say we've encumbered or expended about 86% of those federal. And the ARPA local fiscal recovery funds, we've encumbered or expended about 82% of those funds. So money is moving. I don't wish anybody to think we're just sitting on our laurels. We are getting it out into the community, and it's doing some good stuff.
Yeah, and with all due respect, I'm happy we're not just throwing money out until we know how we're supposed to do it, because that's when fraud comes in. And when we get the guidelines, we get the training, we'll get the money out. But until then, I'm not frustrated by that. I want to make sure we do it right. Secondly, when we talk about we spent $27,000 on administrative, we're not hiring people, right? What are we doing with that money?
No, so in the federal universe, it's really important that you get consultants who specialize in this, and we've been utilizing Wade Trim for most of our federal planning efforts. So you'll find, you know, we utilize Wade Trim when we're doing our consolidated plan and our annual action plan every year. They help us in review of our CAPER before we bring it to you in December if we have any questions with that. So we keep them on retainer for technical assistance and then bring them in. They're a part of our Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, local housing incentive strategies. They really do specialize in this arena. And so I think it's prudent and wise that they use their national network of fellow consultants to make sure that the information we're bringing to you is fully vetted and by professionals who specialize in it.
So with that said, I guess I'm not sure what Councilmember Beckman is getting at as far as helping nonprofits hire people, because unless it's just part-time, temporary to get up to speed, these are not recurring funds, correct?
This is a one-time allocation.
And you never use non-recurring funds for recurring positions. So I don't know that it would be beneficial for nonprofits to use this money to hire people and have to lay them off in a year. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I would tend to agree with you as well. However, the turnaround, first of all, they can't get staffing, period. And the turnaround, they don't have funds allocated enough, or available enough to get staffing. So even if it's if you can pay for someone for a year or two to navigate a landlord liaison position or something to get people coordinated entry out there,
All right.
it can make a little difference.
I just want to clarify that, because we don't want people thinking they can just go out with these funds and hire people and then
Have to live.
expect the funds to keep coming, because it's not going to happen. Mr. Duck, you had something to
Well, I
say?
think, Denise and I talked a little bit earlier about it. I think at some point we had $600,000 thereabouts allocated to Blue Sky, right? That's-
875,000.
That's, so I think, whether or not we pick smaller end users and dole out the money that way versus some larger, more impactful projects, personally, I kind of like the impactful project component of this. When you have a pot of money at $1.6 million, that gives you an opportunity to try to make some meaningful, but those are harder to find, come about, and get to fruition.
Sure.
It's easier to dole out at some of the end users at smaller amounts and that sort of thing. So some of it is a matter of priority, what opportunities we have and what opportunities we want to either wait for or take advantage of. And to some extent, you're subject to the vagaries of timing and that sort of thing on some of those projects. So.
Okay. All right, so let's continue to get trained, and let's get the money out, but do it properly and do it legally and all that good stuff. So.
Yeah, this
all
is an administrative public hearing, so y'all get to hear this again on Thursday night.
All right.
You're welcome.
All right. Anything else on this? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Parks and Rec, 4.1, please.
Approve a contract for purchase of real property located at 1399 Pineapple Lane in an amount not to exceed $620,000 for the open space impact fees.
Good afternoon, Mayor,
Good
council
afternoon.
members. Art Cater, Parks and Recreation Director. The item for you today is one that I've been anticipating for a long, long time. It is the purchase of a piece of property that's approximately 3.4 acres, and it's just north of Moccasin Lake Park. This parcel will become an addition to the park and provide for the preservation of the land that is there. If council approves the purchase, the property would remain in its natural state with minimal improvements, which will allow the public to basically gain access to the beautiful piece of property that it is. The funding for the purchase is coming from also an area I'd like is open space recreation impact fee. It's very narrow, as you know, and it's very difficult sometimes to spend that money, but this is one project we're doing. I also want to thank Robert Casmir, he's a real estate guy back here. Well, there he is. He did all the work. I'm just standing there saying because it's a piece of park property that we need and we love. But I want to thank him for all that he did. We've been interested in this property for many years with no success, but Kaz must have the magic touch. So I wanted to thank him. We're available for any questions you might ask.
Questions or comments on this item? Yes, sir.
I'm happy to see this. And let me ask you, what's going to happen with the home and the shed that's on that lot now?
Well, I think we're going to remove the shed and the home that's there, and those are some of the improvements. We'll do that. There's also some pepper trees and bushes there that we'll need to clean out as well. There's an open meadow area there, and it's really very nice. It's something we don't normally have actually in the park, so to speak, a meadow like this is.
Thanks.
Anything else? Yes.
I think it's wonderful, thank you, and it helps speak to our green print goals as well, so really appreciate it.
Okay. Good.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yep. Guess not. Good job. Consent?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Public Works, 5.1, please.
Approve a professional service agreement with Broadus and Associates to provide owner's representative services for the new City Hall project.
Good afternoon, Mayor,
Good afternoon.
council members. Marcus Williamson, the Public Works Director. For your review and consent, a professional services agreement for Broadus and Associates to provide owner representative professional services in the amount of $1,105,181. This agreement supports both the new City Hall and the MSB renovations. So a typical construction project might have some move requirements with it. However, what we're seeing in this one is it's going to be very extensive, as we're actually going to impact a number of our departments. So, just for instance, it's going to impact IT, permitting, planning, public communications, human resources, engineering, legal, city leadership, council, city clerk, innovation, neighborhoods, economic development, finance, and procurement. So touching a bulk of our folks. So with all of that, we recognize there's going to be a heavy move requirement associated with this. So having done a number of large moves in the past, it's the attention to detail, it's planning it out, it's making sure that everything is in place when you need to do it, down to do you have the computers and the copiers moving when they need to, IT, just a lot of different pieces to make sure it's coordinated. So clearly we need to make sure that we're providing the public, superior public services that's expected by our city, and we maintain it throughout the project. So to accomplish this, we wanted to leverage the owner's representative to help ensure all this coordination's occurring. With the MSB, it gets a little bit more complicated because we're going to be moving people in and out in phases of the building, so there's an additional requirement to make sure that we're coordinating, and then that can ripple into the project from one phase to the next. So if we don't get somebody moved on time and it's a city project, now that's a delay that you're pushing into the project. that the contractor couldn't have done. So making sure that we've got a good owner's schedule, we know what we need to do to keep things moving is going to be critical. So we wanted to leverage Burtis and Associates to help with that. They've done multiple types of these moves. They're experienced keeping folks on track and moving through the different pieces. And, you know, some of the nuances we really need their help with as we're getting into it is we're going to be touching in MSB various mechanical and electrical systems. You have to commission those systems as you're going through. So having somebody look at it, how do you do this while still moving and make sure all that's going through the process. Just a lot of technical coordination that also needs to occur. Again, trying to avoid any of those delays that might come. So it's that proper planning and execution is what's going to avoid all of those additional costs. So we want to leverage them to assist with that. City Hall and MSB are also being executed concurrently. That's to help keep the cost down. The MSB renovations has got a lot smaller ones. It could get more costly if we weren't doing it concurrently because you can kind of bounce trades across the project. So that's part of why we're trying to do this. But by trying to get those cost savings in it, you really need to carefully plan how that is all going to happen because, again, you delay one, it could impact the other. Your trades need to make sure they've got their staffing planned accordingly. So all of that coordination and making sure things happen on time is critical. Burtis Associates, as we have reviewed, they have got significant City Hall experience. I think it was over 14 City Halls that they showed on it, as well as a number of different renovations. So they definitely seem like the right partner to come in and be able to help us through all of this. We've also put on their plate the A&E, the Architect and Engineering Coordination, and the Construction Manager at Risk Coordination. We've put in both scheduling and estimating support to make sure that the project's remaining on schedule and within budget. They'll be leading some of the cost reviews that go on, so every design deliverable that comes out, they will check the scope that's being put in there against the budget, and then they'll be leading the discussions to make sure that that stays on budget and we don't get too far down the road and then have to start redoing a bunch of design and absorbing costs associated with that. They've got the ability to get in, analyze the schedule in detail, look, are they staffing the jobs properly? Are there delays that we need to be worked to? And again, bring that back into all the moves and the city actions that we have to do to be able to help us out. So they'll be playing the active roles in construction oversight, helping with a lot of the pre-purchase items that we need to know. Some of those lead times that are out there, as everyone kind of knows, are all over the place. So they've already been kind of helped point out a couple of those long lead items that we need to make sure that we're getting on track, getting them ordered, so we don't delay the project to the end and then have to pay extended general conditions or something with the CMARC contractor. So important we get them in, also doing the constructability reviews so that they're coming in, taking a look at, is what's on the design actually constructible? Can we get the equipment where we need to? Does it make sense? Will staff personnel be able to move the way that they should efficiently through the buildings? In the spirit of transparency, Public Works Department, we've also taken a couple of staff hits recently, so I think some folks know about it. We've also got a couple of key retirements coming up, so we have pushed a little bit more onto the owner's representative because we recognize we've really got to be able to offload some. We've got a lot coming through the pipeline, and this is kind of a means for us to leverage somebody that's been doing this day in and day out. The funds are available in the capital improvement projects, ENGF 220001, City Hall, and ENGF 23001, Municipal Services Building Renovations to fund it. This effort is in alignment with Clearwater's strategic goals for superior public service and the high-performing government. It allows us to align a bunch of our functions, better support the interactions with folks for close proximity. City staff's reviewed and approved the request. Also wanted to point out, it's important just for all of us to keep in mind that we'll lean on the owner's rep very heavily to assist us, but we're all going to have to participate. So this is touching a lot of folks, which means we all have to be able to participate in that also, make sure that we're attending some of the meetings to help. Key ones are going to be, how do we keep the continuity of services going? So there's no way we're not going to be able to help with some of that heavy lifting, and down to, at some point, people have to pick up their stuff off their desk and relocate it to their new cubicle, which hopefully will be much nicer in the new spaces. So with that, thank you, and open up for any questions.
Questions or comments? Yes, sir.
It was a great comprehensive, layout there for all of us. I'm glad that we're picking somebody that has had a lot of experience in this. And I guess my question would be, are we going to be able to relocate some of the apartments into the utilities building while this is going on, or
Swisher Building?
county?
Yeah, we'll have a lot of space available in there should we.
It might be better to, if we're extensively remodeling, to shuffle them out, while we're doing it, so.
Yeah, the county still has a few employees over there, but they mentioned to us that they would be moving out sooner rather than later, and depending on our needs, they would be very flexible with us on that.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
Thank you, Marcus. That was a great presentation. So I just wanted to say I'm really thrilled that we'll have probably the most cost-efficient city hall in the region. And I hear some confusion talking with residents recently, and want to make sure that we're clear here that this new city hall cost is $31.5 million. That owner's rep is going to keep us on track.
Correct. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I think there's some clarification. We did want to meet with finance. I think 34 was some of the other numbers, but we're going to sit down and walk through with finance. That was one of the conversations we had. We want to break down between the two budgets and make sure we're bending
Municipal
all of
services.
these
Okay.
costs properly.
That's
So
all.
that's one of the first things we wanted them in and walk through that with them.
That sounds fair. But again, it's extremely cost-efficient on the upfront costs, while of course allowing us to save money on the rent we've been paying at the bank building. I think it's a great example of how we collectively as a council, with Jennifer's leadership and her staff and with public input, arrived to this place where we have a very cost-efficient solution for our city hall. But I also want to ensure that we continue to move forward with a building design that will show we are a leader in building city spaces that are built to high energy efficiency standards, which we're committed to, and that generate their own electricity. These designs will save us money year after year and reduce pollution at the same time. And of course, they will need to be built to be resilient to extreme weather, which will not only protect that investment, but hopefully will lower insurance costs. So it's a lot of wins with this new design.
Yes.
Anything else on this?
Pardon me?
Well, I did want to maybe tack on, there'll be an opportunity through this our staff's moving forward, that this is the highest priority is to stay on budget.
That's what you said,
But
yeah.
there will be value engineering decisions, maybe back and forth between MSB and City Hall, and where we spend those dollars to get to where we get to the finish line we want us to get there. Because certainly, we want everything we want, but we got to stay within the constraints we have. So we're trying to give them a little bit of flexibility to spend where you really want it. And I think this presentation that Marcus did is a good example of him just being so laser focused in his team on making sure that we move forward with budget being the highest priority.
Thank you. Anything else? Consent on this?
Yes.
Thank you. Fire Department 6.1, please.
Authorize a purchase order of municipal emergency services for personal protective equipment.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Scott Ellis, Fire Chief, Clearwater Fire Rescue. My apologies, there's a lot going on in this item, but the basic element of it, this item for you is to request approval for the purchase of personal protective equipment for our personnel, tools and equipment, and communication systems, air pack parts, and miscellaneous equipment for a not-to-exceed amount of $600,000 to the Municipal Emergency Service of Pinellas Park. This dollar figure will provide the needed funds for October 1, 2023 to September 30th, 2024. Items include 49 sets of protective ensembles, there's about $277,000, $100,000 for air pack parts, $25,000 to other departments who utilize the same company, and under our procedures, we have to, if it goes over $100,000, we have to have your approval. $65,000 for new equipment for a new engine, $35,000 for extrication equipment and servicing, and $98,000 for various PPE parts or repair parts. Funds are available for this item in this various CIP projects to include Personal Protective Equipment Fund 91261, the SCBA Replacement and Upgrade 91229, and extrication tools of 91263. Additionally, as part of the Pinellas County Fire Agreement, Pinellas County provides reimbursement of 11.67%, which is the current coverage that we have that's unincorporated, and that is the most recent one that we got about 2 weeks ago. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments on this item? Consent?
Yes.
Thank you. Planning, 7.1, please.
Approve the annexation initial future land use map designation of residential medium and initial zoning atlas designation of medium density residential for 2634 South Drive.
Thank you, Kyle Brotherton, Planning and Development. This voluntary annexation petition involves a 1.067 acre property consisting of one parcel of land occupied by a detached dwelling. The applicant is requesting annexation in order to receive sanitary sewer and solid waste service from the city, and the applicant is aware of the sewer impact and assessment fees that must be paid in full prior to connection and of additional costs to extend to the city's sewer service. The Development Review Committee is proposing that the 0.34 acres of South Drive right-of-way not currently within the city also be annexed. And this proposal supports the high-performing government and community well-being strategic priorities as detailed in your government memo.
Any questions or comments on this item? Okay, thank you very much. Public Utilities, 8.1, please.
Amend Clearwater Code of Ordinances to increase miscellaneous fees related to temporary service deposits, impact fees, and miscellaneous user fees.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Rich Gardner, Public Utilities. The item before you today is an increase in the miscellaneous water and sewer fees. These fees were based upon evaluation by the city's consultant, Stantec, who along with Finance and Public Utilities is recommending the increase. Following is a summarized version of the information that was shared during our recent one-on-ones. These are single customer fees that haven't been updated for several years. They cover things like deposits for new services. Deposits reduce utilities' loss of revenue risk and will be returned to customers upon a history of on-time payments. Users' fees includes turn-on, special readings, reset of a meter, impact fees, etc. Impact fees are based upon the value of our existing system assets and our one-time fees to cover the cost of capacity for new development. All of these fees represent less than 1% of the water utilities revenue and are generally within the range of comparable municipalities. To calculate the new user fees, Stantec, our consultant, interviewed utility staff to determine the labor, equipment, and materials expended in providing these services. Generally, the labor services are performed by customer service, engineering, and our field staff. Equipment and vehicles such as excavators, service trucks, TV trucks are used to perform these services, and materials costs includes meters, fittings, pipe, etc. The cost of labor and materials were added together to determine the actual cost of services which was the basis of the revised fees. Impact fees are the fees charged when a customer elects to connect to our system. These funds collected are used for growth and expansion and related capital projects. Current fees are not aligned with the cost of infrastructure in place, and the proposed fees are based upon the cost of that infrastructure. They're calculated by dividing the system value, less credits and grants by the system capacity. We benchmark all of the fees against other municipalities. For example, Clearwater's current and proposed fees, impact fees, are some of the lowest in the area. In conclusion, fees have not been updated in a long time. The fees should be updated to reflect current costs, practices, and policies. By increasing the fees, we can minimize rate increases. The fee increases will be implemented over 4 years. We recommend that we regularly review miscellaneous fees to ensure that appropriate cost recovery, and the cycle will be aligned with the rate increase study every 5 years. I'm asking for approval of the revised ordinance 9725-23, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments? Yes.
Just out of curiosity, on page 19, why does St. Pete not include in that graph water, but just sewer? Just out of curiosity.
I cannot answer that. I don't know. This is Leticia with Stantec. Leticia.
Hello, good afternoon, Leticia DeHollick with Stantec. St. Pete does not provide, I think they work with Tampa Bay Water. They may not have the infrastructure to have the water side of the fee, I think is the issue.
Okay. Thank you.
You have to have the backbone infrastructure in place in order to recover that cost.
Okay.
I had a few, so on the process, you've got, the hours spent by the cost, per hour, labor, vehicles, and equipment, and then unit cost equals the cost of service. Do we have any kind of potential to realize savings with technology improvements for meter reading or things that'll reduce labor with automation and stuff?
So what we're recovering here is the process of the staff doing the work that connects a new service. And so I don't know, I don't know of any technology that you can put in play.
Because we're going to, going forward, we're going to do this cyclically. Any savings for efficiencies will be reflected in the next cycle.
Okay.
I'm hoping to get robotic employees, but the city manager hasn't approved them yet.
I do think, Councilwoman Beckham, that this process of the interview and the conversations that we have with staff can often generate some thought through what is happening step by step and perhaps reduce some of the steps or
Some efficiencies?
yeah, so that there may be something that comes of these conversations. I just don't know, automation related.
Okay. And then on the slide that talks about water, sewer, and lawn impact fees, is lawn reclaimed water? Is that what lawn means? What does lawn impact mean?
The lawn impact fee is basically...
Lawn, L-A-W? Yeah.
The lawn impact fee is basically the additional demand that a customer, the incremental demand the customer will place on utility system. So you've got, on the water side, you have your basic water demand, your basic needs. And then in addition to that, single-family homes will often have the irrigation, the additional needs just to keep their green.
So very often residents ask for a lawn meter so that they don't have to pay the sanitary charges associated because it doesn't go to sanitary.
Okay.
But your system still has that capacity to provide that service.
I didn't get that.
And it's different than reclaimed. It's not reclaimed. It's potable water. It just doesn't go through.
Well, I guess if it's, I don't know if it's the cost of providing, or it's the cost of that additional incremental need. But I mean, I think in the total calculation of capacity, you've got capacity for reclaimed or irrigation, so it's all one capacity system.
But some areas don't have reclaimed water, so they have to use potable water if they have a sprinkler system.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is all of the fixed assets were combined in the purpose of this calculation. And so it would have all of the assets used for whether it be irrigation or reclaimed.
Okay.
But I think one other thing to keep in mind too is that this is a one-time charge for a brand new connection. And generally speaking, I think the city of Clearwater is only generating about $150,000 to $200,000 of total revenues in that particular area. So it's a very small portion of
revenue for the city.
And this would be a one-time charge for brand-new connection. Are you
Yeah.
saying for a new house, brand-new structure house, or a move-in, anytime somebody moves in?
So anytime somebody needs either a new connection to your water sewer system, or if they are upsizing or downsizing.
Okay, I get it, all right. Because there's a significant jump between the lawn one, those types of meters, $70 to $202 versus the smallish one for sewer, and a pretty big one, $400 for the water.
It's really driven by the assets, and so the water and the sewer, the water and the irrigation saw that increase. And it's basically it's whatever the assets, the investment in your infrastructure.
Those meters,
Yeah.
yep. And then the other thing is, on the benchmarking for local combined impact fees, it's a little hard to really get a handle on it because there are so many differences here noted on the right. Clearwater, it does not include lawn fee for comparison purposes, and then I don't know what CIAC charges are in Tampa. But I just wonder how comparable are they really? I mean, because it looks like, and I'm happy that we're doing phenomenally well. But
I think
as
we
long as
tried
we're
to address
comparing.
that in some of the statements we have in there, but basically, the type of system that you provide, so the complexity of treatment, for example, you have RO plants that are in technology that is a little beyond some of just the regular treatment of water, and I'm going a little bit outside of my comfort zone here, but there's certain things that are just very different between one utility and the next, and so the density of your area, the age of the infrastructure that you're putting into place, the more recent the more dollars you have to spread over these new connections. The more new connections you have, again, you lower those fees, and so there's so many other variables that we really don't take into effect we don't go deeper into those as we put these surveys together. We just basically take, here's what each city is currently charging, but we have to understand that there's a lot of variances between entities.
If our equipment goes bad, does a resident have to pay any portion to get, if the meter breaks down or is too old, and my meter's now dysfunctional, do I have to pay to get a new meter on there?
No, generally the resident will ask us to test the meter.
I
We
saw
take it
that.
to our meter shop, we test it, and if it's bad, we replace it, no cost.
No cost.
If we test it and it's good, there is a charge.
Yep.
to
I read that, yeah.
Generally, meters go bad in the customer's favor, so we don't get a whole lot of customers asking.
And then no kind of supports if families are disadvantaged in some way or elderly, people can't afford something, do we have payment programs or things like that, or is it,
It's more on the customer service side.
yeah?
I think one of the things to that particular item that we considered was turn on and turn off fees are probably the ones that are most often used. And so they would generally impact people more. We had calculated total costs of those to be substantially higher than what they're being proposed. I think they were either $115 perhaps, but we're proposing a change from where they're at now, which I can tell you in a minute, but basically a 4-year change that doesn't get it all the way up to what we had calculated, just to allow for some of that dynamic that you're concerned about.
Thanks.
Anything else on this item? Yes, sir.
Mayor, I do think I'm going to mention the business impact.
Yes, please.
Last year, the legislature enacted Senate Bill 170, which requires cities and counties to create a business impact statement every time the city is going to pass an ordinance. There are exceptions to that rule, but that new rule requiring a business impact statement just went into effect in October. So it is a brand new law with a brand new responsibility that is on the city and on counties. As I said, there are exceptions. There is an open question as to whether this type of ordinance actually falls within the new statute or not. And honestly, it's a gray area. We don't know exactly how the courts are going to interpret it. Because it is a gray area and because utilities do have the potential to affect a fair number of stakeholders out there, I do think it's best for us to go ahead and complete the business impact statement. That's the safest course of action. It's not a huge burden on us, at least not in this particular context. So we are working with utilities and the consultant to do that. The law says that if the business impact statement is required, then it must be posted on our website well before the adoption of the ordinance. The ordinance is not being adopted today. It's not even being adopted on Thursday. It won't be adopted until a few weeks from now. So we have time. We have a couple weeks to figure this out. But it is my advice that we should go ahead and prepare that statement because we don't want to go through this entire exercise and then find ourselves in litigation on the back end of it.
Consensus on that? Yes, okay, great. Thank you for bringing that up. Mr. Slaughter, did you have something you wanted to say?
I think it was covered. It was just with regard to technology, the fees or the revenue that this covered is less than 1% of our revenue. And any implementation of technology would likely help us on the stuff that we've already made a conscious decision to do at a loss because of the turn off. So, and I shouldn't say loss, it's more of an investment because we'll have the customer that will be pay revenue through the relationship with the customer. So any type of technology we had that would help us with turning meters on and off and kind of doing some of those functions, we're already kind of consciously making a good decision. So I just want to make sure that clarity. I don't think there's anything that would help us with this particular aspect, but maybe technology in the future certainly will help us bring that margin down.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you very much. Solid waste, 9.1, please.
Prepare list of vehicles and equipment surplus.
Good afternoon, Craig Townsend, Fleet Manager. On August 4th, 2022, Council approved the vehicle replacement list for fiscal year 2023, authorizing purchase of replacement vehicles and equipment. This agenda item is requesting Council to declare surplus the vehicles and equipment detailed to be replaced per the list and authorize disposal via auction through Tampa Machinery Auction.
Any questions or comments on this item? Consent?
Yes.
Thank you. Let's take a brief recess.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the November 13th Clearwater City Council work session. We will continue with City Clerk, item 10.1, please.
Disband the Charter Review Committee. Council members, during the last meeting, the Charter Review Committee presented the report and their recommendations, and at that meeting, there was council consensus to disband the committee.
Okay, any discussion? Consent? Thank you. 10.2, please.
Approved 2024 state legislative agenda. Council members, in your agenda pack, I included a copy of the proposed legislative agenda. Most of the items are carryovers from last year. I am going to highlight a couple of changes. One of them is the inclusion of the local bill, and that is streamlining the Downtown Development Board, and that is something that the council recently directed the city attorney to pursue. The other item, there is a change under public safety. Although as a carryover, the first bullet regarding the seeking an additional exemption for ticketed concert events as it relates to the carrying of concealed weapons. After the agenda was published, staff has done some further review and recommend deleting it from the agenda. We will continue watching any legislation that may impact that, but for now, we're going to go ahead and suggest that it be removed from the legislative agenda. Everything else pretty much is the same with the exception of cybersecurity. We did add that, support legislation that provides liability protections for local governments in connection with cybersecurity incident, and continue funding the State of Florida Local Cybersecurity Grant Program, as well as My Safe Florida Home, continue funding My Safe Florida Home, assisting eligible homeowners with free wind mitigation home inspections and matching grants to fortify homes against hurricane damage. And that was a program that was that began this year, and it is on hold because there were so many grant applications, so we're hoping that funding still continues so they can revamp that program. And with that, as always, although not everything is listed on the legislative agenda, these are just the main highlights and priorities. We will work with I'll work with staff as well as with our lobbyists, so if any items do come up during session, we'll advocate or oppose accordingly. The other thing I did want to note is that I know that the Environmental Advisory Board is coming in at the council meeting to make their presentation, and I know that they have made some requests, and most of them are included in our legislative agenda. They do have a recommendation for Cooper's Point, and that is something that we had on as an item, but I just want to make aware, although it's not listed on the agenda as an appropriation request, that's what we were thinking, as well as a Restore Act grant. Right now, the city doesn't have any funds allocated towards the project. That's one of the reasons why it's not on the agenda. But we are looking at other programs. So in order for us to seek Restore grant, we need funding from other agencies, and I believe we have their support, and we're just waiting to see if the project gets any funding from those agencies so we can pursue that matter. And then once the city does have any funds allocated towards the project, we can pursue an appropriation grant.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
So the first time this came before me, I assumed that I missed half the process, but this is the second time, so make me understand how this list is generated. How are the priorities identified and issues to oppose, and what is our role in it? In other words, how is this vetted?
This is just staff's recommendation to council, so this is council's opportunity to review. So I work with the SET, so our department directors, they identify projects, and sometimes there are items that maybe even council identifies, or a couple of bullets from last year that were driven by council. So really, it's working with staff. Each department has their own respective professional organizations that they identify, or sometimes it's just needs like appropriation requests. That would be a need from the department that they would identify. And then we put it on the list. They advise me what needs to go on the list or what does not, and then I present it to council for council to review and discuss.
So in the future, let's say I would like to have a priority considered. Is there a timeline I need to adhere to, or is it an ongoing thing?
Oh, no. This would be, now, the reason why I present it to council for approval is that then this is provided to our lobbyists. So then they know what are those main items that we're looking at, main priorities that we would like to work towards. Of course, during the legislative session, there are so many bills coming in. This is just a small focus area. If they see items that come in that impact municipalities or our city in particularly, they will advise me, and I will share with council and with staff.
Okay. Thank you.
But in terms of like council priorities, like if there's a member of council who wants to add something, this is your opportunity right now.
Okay.
Okay, yes, sir.
I'm wondering if we could ask as a priority to maybe revisit the legislation that allows you to carry a firearm with a fishing pole. I see the open carry of assault rifles is on there, but I think it could be amended. I'm not saying that they can't, but I mean amend it where you can't, walk through a public beach with it. I understand the issue. I'm not saying you can't do it, but they could amend it in a way that, doesn't cause what we've had happen.
And it probably won't cause much pushback if we're specific, right?
Well,
Is that what you're thinking?
I think it, saying you could walk across a beach to a pier with a Popeil pocket fisherman and an AR-15, that's not exactly what legislature had in mind, so you get my drift.
You called it police officer. I think most people do.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
So, I had a question about, what about the bill that was proposed last year about permits and inspections? Was Senate Bill 682 about if we didn't do permits or inspections in a timely manner, people would still get their permits and inspections, residential building permits? It was, timeframes and penalties, reducing fees if certain timeframes are not met. Are we gonna keep an eye on that legislation or make a statement about that? I think our planning department would weigh in on that one.
They did weigh in during session, and then I shared those concerns with our lobbyist and with legislators as it came up. But I will have to say that kind of falls in I like the home rule.
Okay.
So it's,
Okay.
that's a broad statement, but that's where we would, when we see those items, we would come individually as, we would either voice our opinion at that time when an individual bill is filed.
Are we going to articulate anything about potential changes to PSTA, the board makeup?
That would be a direction I would want from council, because I don't believe council has taken a position on that. I know that it was discussed or mentioned, but I would need direction from council.
Do you have any opinion, David? You're on that PSTA board.
I think it's going to take care of itself. So, we'll see.
Okay. I had a question about, so we're going to give these legislative priorities to our lobbyists, but our legislators already have committee weeks and they've already been up there for a mini session and all that. So are we behind the ball, or have they been up there advocating already?
Our lobbyists meet constantly with our legislators, so that once this is finalized, I provide them a copy of them. So as part of their daily meetings with them, they share with them, and I also extend a copy of it to them electronically so that they know that who our lobbyists are and they know the positions.
Okay. Under the sustainability and resiliency, I see a lot of these, whether or not word for word, they look real similar to what the EAB is going to present, I guess, on Thursday. They sent their attachment. But like, develop a statewide climate resiliency plan and funding source to assist local communities who have implemented plans to combat sea level rise. Has there been any legislation introduced already? Do we know anything about who, and then we talk about provide intergovernmental coordination that supports sustainability and resiliency efforts at the county and municipal levels, such as clean energy, land conservation, smart growth, and all that stuff. Would that be, like Forward Pinellas that would manage something like that? Is that what we're thinking? Or should we wait until the EAB presents that on Thursday, or was that some of our staff that presented some of those?
That was actually, I believe, your recommendation from last year, So staff is recommending to keep it on.
Okay.
Although there may not have been legislation passed during the last legislative session, I know that there were efforts, and the Florida League of Cities was trying to do something, so there are efforts still, so I would keep it on just in case.
Okay. And then, so as Vice President of the Suncoast League of Cities, so the Suncoast League of Cities has their list of priorities. We usually narrow it down to about 3. And then we have these priorities that are particular for Clearwater. I'm sure a lot of them would permeate throughout the region. But like the last one, there's sustainability and resiliency. Establish a framework for state water infrastructure and water quality funding program that includes sustainable utility practices and intergovernmental coordination. So again, that intergovernmental coordination, all those things, when we make our trips up to Tallahassee, I'm assuming our lobbyists are going to give us some bullet points, some talking points, some stats to flesh this out. What does this look like as we take this sheet up to Tallahassee and start having conversations down here?
Well, that depends. So they would give us, if there's bills already filed,
Right.
then of course they would provide us information on that. But I think at that point, if there is a bill, that's when I will share with staff to see, okay, what does staff know, or that's where you would get staff's input to see, are they working with the county? Has the county already, or a regional agency already addressed this through staff? So I think that's when we would have to gather that information. And I would be if I would be advised of when you're going, so I can make sure that you have that information before you go.
Okay, so we are adequately prepared, right. I had a question about cybersecurity. Support legislation that provides liability protections for local governments in connection with a cybersecurity incident. Do we have limitations on our vulnerability right now for cybersecurity?
I would have to ask the IT director. I'll have to get back to council on that. I'm not really sure what the current policy limitations are.
Okay. And then the MySafe Florida, or MySafe Florida Home, assisting eligible homeowners with free mitigation home inspections and things like that. So the legislature had that little mini session, and they recently increased that funding by $180 million. In the newspaper article said to help like 17,000 homeowners throughout the state. So are we going to advocate for even more?
Yeah, the idea is to keep it rolling. Right
Okay.
now, it's not.
Okay, good. I mean, I think that's good too. And then the last statement I love here in italics. So you've got, in addition, the city will support the Florida League of Cities in pursuing its legislative issues. The city will strive to inform residents of legislative initiatives that will impact the city and their quality of life, and encourage citizen engagement with state legislators. So I'd like to make sure we take that on full stride and what that might look like. Because, to impact legislation, you need people to call and visit and write and all that stuff. And so it's a full court press, and it's in, like, you all know, it's like you got the notice last night at 10 o'clock that the language changed, and now you need to start. So how do you envision us doing that?
What I try to do is stick it, actually, what I did during the last session, I worked with public communications, and we posted something on social media, because that seems to be the best outlet. But it's only on items that is strictly on the agenda, or something that the council has expressed an interest. Because one of the things you do have to keep in mind is that there's so many issues. They may or may not impact the city, but more importantly, the city may not fully support. And I like to use the example of vacation rentals, something that a lot of our residents fully support, but we are in a particular position where we are grandfathered in. So anytime that may come up, I may not engage and ask public communications to post something, but for the most part, when the items are on our agenda, or if it's something that is obvious and an attack on our home rule, I will go ahead and work with them so that they can post. And kind of the same messaging that the Florida League of Cities provides, contact so-and-so, that's what we'll do.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, anything else on this item? Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I mean, I was debating whether to chime in on this, okay, but As the clerk said, this is information that's being provided to our lobbyists, and so that means that we are using public resources in furtherance of these objectives. In addition to that, this is something that I go by to see, is this something the council has authorized me to work on? So whether it's going to be reviewing legislation, whether it's proposing things, PSDA is a good example. Is that something we want to be involved in, something we don't want to be involved in, et cetera? Some issues can be and perhaps are better resolved behind the scenes. Sometimes issues are better by individual people making calls with individual relationships, and that's okay. But with this being the city's official agenda, it is important to know that there's consensus behind it, and if there's changes, that's okay, but there really should be changes that are made from the dais. This is actually the city's official position. So for example, in the bottom, when the city is saying that we oppose the open carry of assault rifles, is that something that we are directing our lobbyists to go to Tallahassee and say? And if so, is that something that, do we have a common definition of what that means and things like that? So those are just things to think about because that's in the agenda.
I don't think, I think trying to, a definition of an assault rifle is hard to do. I mean, I would be just as appalled seeing somebody carrying a shotgun or a hunting rifle, you know? So, is that what you're talking about, like in public?
Sure, I mean, that's what I'm just reading off of the page. So as drafted, it looks like this document says that we will be devoting our resources to opposing the open carry of assault rifles. This is not my document, but just reading it. So is that something that the council wants to devote lobbying resources to do? Because if that's not something you want to be devoting lobbying resources to do, then it should be stricken from this list.
Yeah,
Right?
I think that's,
So, I mean, I think it is a little bit of a legacy. I don't know if that was on there last year.
It was from last year.
Maybe personally responsible for it, so I'll take this, but certainly I think your new chief needs to be the one that makes a decision on whether or not his recommendation is still a concern. But, you know, the open carrying an assault rifle already is a problem. It just said there's an exception that allows it in the scenario that we've seen. Okay, the current law doesn't allow anybody to openly carry a rifle unless they're on the way to fishing and hunting, which is what the application is that we've seen consternation about. So the ask at the time, I think there may have been a decision to put the language on there the way it is, but that was the provision we were looking to change.
Right.
Further refine it so that, listen, if somebody's out in the middle of the panhandle in a rural area and they're going to go fishing on some river and they need to carry an assault rifle so they don't get eaten by a bear, I don't think we object to that. It's about these congregated public spaces and, quite honestly, people who are really just using it for to create, a public incident for clicks as opposed to any other legitimate fishing opportunity. So that was the reason that I put it on there at the time, and certainly we had our own public incident that generated it. But I can't necessarily speak if that's the will of the council or the will of the current administration or chief. That was just my experience and my reasoning.
I think what I'd like to do is revisit the actual ordinance or the way it's stated and maybe rewrite it in a way where
We're preempted on the ordinance, so we couldn't write an ordinance that supersede the statute, I don't believe.
well, I don't mean our ordinance, I mean, we could ask that the statute be rewritten in a way that, doesn't cause,
Eliminates beaches.
how you do that?
You can ask, and then it'd probably be a question of how much really political capital are you willing and looking to put in to try to get there, because it is a lengthy list with some priorities, and I think there's probably a decision that, I don't think this needs to be decided today. I don't even know if I'm the right person to have this conversation, but certainly there's things in there that may be more achievable than others that are worth putting your time and efforts towards.
I would agree with all that, except to say that as drafted, it says that we are asking to oppose open carry of assault rifles. So I think the direction from council that would be needed is either, are you comfortable with that language that is in there? Or would you like to strike that language entirely? Or would you like to amend the language to say something else? And I think those are kind of the three decision points. My personal opinion on this is that anytime you're talking about firearm issues, it's a very heavy lift politically. It's a sensitive topic from people across the political spectrum. I certainly think that the legislature has made their view known, which is that they are looking to expand people's ability to carry in public. We saw that with the permitless carry recently. The governor has also spoken in favor of that. My opinion is that this is a very hard lift politically, but if the council feels strongly about this and feels that this is the right thing to do, that's okay. But if that's the view, then we need to articulate exactly what we're going to propose as far as, for example, are we looking to create carve-outs where someone could not carry on a public beach, as an example? Are we looking to create carve-outs for certain types of firearms? What is the definition of an assault rifle and things like that?
I think you have a hard definition with an assault rifle. And look, I'm a real proponent for protection for women. They should be carrying to even the playing field. So I'm not looking to take away firearms from people. But you don't have to carry a machine gun or a frickin' AR-15 around with you. That, to me, I'm fine with having that not in public. And the only place that I'm aware of that it says you can do that is in this statute that says you can, if you have a fishing pole in your hand, you can take it with you anywhere. I mean, to me, that's crazy. That should be amended somehow, and I don't know how. I mean, I would be ready to fight that, but I don't know how you do that. I mean, you just tell legislature that they need to take a look at this, because
Let me suggest that we strike it temporarily and then have the chief look into it further, and maybe give us some recommendations for us to review, and then add later if we care to with more specific language.
maybe that's what I would be in favor of.
Okay with that?
I have a question. Is this just a list of our stances, or actually a list for our lobbyists who work on every single point equally? Like, how does that work?
It's a list of priorities for our lobbyists, but for staff as well. So, for instance, if staff sees an alert for specific legislation that impacts these particular items. Now, granted, you can't predict every item that's going to come across, so it's really difficult to say. But these are the main ones. These are the ones that staff has highlighted to say, these are the ones that we would like to make sure our lobbyist takes care of.
If they come up.
If they
It's not
come up,
us
correct. It's
initiating.
not,
It's if they.
like, the only thing I can tell you for sure, our local bill.
Right.
At this point, and it still needs its second hearing. So assuming it goes through its second hearing and it gets drafted, we know for a fact that will be filed. And it will have a bill number, and I'll update the agenda with the bill number.
So what's the timeline to have Chief Gandy weigh in with some?
They start their legislation January.
So okay. Because I agree, I mean, if we're gonna put this political clout behind such a heavy statement like that, maybe we should be more specific and be more thoughtful if we go forward.
So keep in mind that this agenda includes the local bill. I do need council to have an approval for this Thursday. If you want me to work with the chief in terms of a suggestion, and then whatever he suggests, I can work with the attorney to make sure that he feels comfortable with the language included. If that is what the chief of police decides, I'll be more than happy to do that, but I do need this to be firmed up, because that's how, once the local bill, this agenda includes a local bill, I need that firm direction, so I can also provide that to our lobbyists so they can start advocating.
And so is it my understanding too, David, as you mentioned, whatever's here is what we allocate staff time and funding and all that stuff to. And when Rosemary, you said, when I read that italicized part at the bottom, we'll strive to inform residents of legislative initiatives that will impact the city and their quality of life, blah, blah, blah. If we don't have the PSTA information on here, if somehow that goes awry and it's not taken care of one-on-one or behind the scenes, are you saying we can't use the city to help inform our residents of that if we have a call to action?
No, well, knowing how the state legislative session works, I would say if a bill is filed regarding PSTA and it looks like it's moving, because we'll know how many committees of reference it will be assigned, I will have the opportunity I'll work with David to make sure he discusses the legislation with each of you individually, so that I can plan it and have it on the agenda to have a formal position if it does move along and we don't have a position on it. So in those instances, I think it's important to have that public discussion so that all of council is on the same page. and that the direction is clear. But if you want to take a position now, not knowing what the bill is, or how many bills of reference or committees of reference are assigned, that's, you can make a broad statement, and then as the bill comes up, we can decide.
So, I just want to clarify a couple of things. The PSTA issue, it's changing every few days, and I think we have to sort of wait until it actually gets filed as a bill. I mean, I think we pretty much come out, we've discussed saying the way it was before, we were opposed to it. So I think we'll see. In the next couple of weeks, we'll see if it just goes away or if it gets what different form it'll come back to us as. And then I just wanted to make another clarification. While think that women should carry firearms, I don't mean, I mean, they should conceal, not open carry. I don't want to see it. Like, I don't want to have people coming up to me and saying something that I didn't mean. But
You don't want Annie Oakley running around downtown?
I don't want that, and I didn't think, I have some rifles. I would never put one except at a gun show maybe over my back and walk it down the street, because I always thought that you couldn't carry a rifle without having it in a case or something. But anyway, I just wanted to make that clarification.
Council, regarding the PSTA bill, what we do know so far, and I think that would be a position the city can take now, is that there was language that was considering removing us being a member of the board. So I think if anything, maybe include language that says that either you support or you oppose one way or the other, but I would say support keeping municipal.
I can
or at
update
least the
you
city of
on that.
Clearwater.
I can update you. I made a number of phone calls last Friday, and by the end of the day, Representative Burfield called back and said that Representative Cheney has put Clearwater in as a permanent seat and has changed the county commission to, I think, just districts, and then Clearwater and St. Pete with a permanent seat, and then the governor would appoint someone. So that part of it has been taken care of, from what I understand, and then Senator Hooper also told me the same thing, because I actually talked to Representative Cheney that morning. It was a rather frustrating call. First of all, she had no clue who I was, even though I introduced her at the opening of the Sound. But I'll leave it at that. She thought I was my son. I recommended you to the governor. I said, no, you didn't. The city council appointed me. No, I recommended you. You got appointed because, no, you did not recommend me to the governor. The governor had nothing to do with me but being appointed mayor. Anyway, it was frustrating. But anyway, that's been taken care of from what I understand. So we'll see what the bill looks like when it comes up. And the other thing I understand is one senator in Pinellas County or in this area is against it, the bill dies. And from what I understand, Dower Roussan was not happy with it. He had some issues. Now, whether those issues, I know they were trying to be addressed, have been addressed. I haven't been updated on that, but I know that that's also a possibility. So that's the latest.
I've had similar conversations with Beerfield as well, and she was very adamant and supportive of Clearwater being part of that board, and she also reassured me, so I think we should be at ease.
All right, so you're going to get with the chief, Rosemary, and see what he does or doesn't recommend for Thursday for us to look at or talk about with that one item. And the rest of the items we okay with, we need to approve them on Thursday, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Any other discussion on them as of right now then? Okay, thank you. City Attorney, 11.1, please.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the appeal that was filed against us relating to Bread and Roses. As the council knows, vehicle safety zone was passed several months ago. As is par for the course, we were, of course, sued for that, and people came in and very confidently predicted the demise of our ordinance. They were wrong. The ordinance is constitutional, as I said from the beginning. The court ruled in our favor, as I said they would, and now they have appealed. So this is simply the appeal to handle that.
Okay, any questions or comments? Consent?
Yes.
Thank you. 11.2, please.
11.2 is just second readings. This one is relating to the panhandling ordinance, but happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on the second reading? Okay. City manager verbal reports, 12.1. I will sit in and listen, but I cannot discuss this. I recuse myself because my son is representing, or My son's firm is representing these people.
Good afternoon, Gina Clayton, Planning and Development. Back in October, you all directed staff to bring forward a discussion item on artificial turf. So what I'd like to do is start the conversation by walking you through the code provisions that are relevant to this topic, give you a little bit of historical information, and then discuss some factors that I think you should consider if you are inclined to amend the Community Development Code to support the use of artificial turf. So before we get started with the details, I think it's important to kind of go back to the beginning of our Community Development Code when it was originally developed. And one of the major goals was to beautify the entire city. So new provisions were implemented for tree protection, and landscaping requirements were expanded. And so I think now that we've had many years of implementation through redevelopment, Clearwater really stands out in Pinellas County because of these high-quality standards that council adopted. So I'd like to start with a review of the code provisions that govern the topic. And yes, this is a familiar PowerPoint look since I ripped it off from the city manager's State of the City. So it's very bright and beautiful. Code section 31502H2 states that any portion of a lot that's not covered by a building or structure or pavement shall be landscaped with grass or other appropriate ground cover and shall be maintained in a neat and orderly manner. Section 31502H3 states that all landscape materials should be, which would include turf, shrubs, and trees, whether required or optional, shall be maintained in a healthy live condition so as to present a neat and attractive appearance. So these two code provisions clearly prescribe the use of live landscaping materials for areas that are not occupied by building structures and pavement. And then the second provision specifically states that turf should be maintained in a healthy living condition. As we know, artificial turf is man-made and is not in a healthy living condition. The next code section that I'd like to point out relates to landscaping generally. There's a table entitled Minimum Plant Materials in 31202, and turf is actually listed in that table. And this, we believe, clearly confirms that turf is considered to be a live plant material. This section also provides some exemptions for single-family and two-family dwellings, and there is no exemption for the use of artificial turf. Further, section 31202B2B specifically provides an exemption for the use of artificial turf in parks and in sporting facilities. And the last code provision I'd like to highlight is the definition of landscaping. Code section 802 states that landscaping means grasses, ground covers, vines, shrubs, trees, and inanimate durable materials such as organic mulches. This definition does not include the term turf, but as I mentioned earlier, that term is actually defined through our minimum plant standards section, and the term inanimate durable material does not include turf because in the context of the Community Development Code, it has been defined as a live plant material. And also, again, we have a carve-out for artificial turf for parks and athletic fields. So I thought it might be interesting to give you a little historical perspective on artificial turf in the city because it has come up before, specifically back in 2011. A property was cited for the installation of artificial turf, and that raised the issue to City Council at that time. And on July 21st of 2011, Council directed staff to prepare an ordinance to allow it. So Planning and Development did a lot of research, spent a lot of time with engineering on the issue. We got input from the Environmental Advisory Board, the Clearwater Beach Association, and Clearwater Neighborhoods Coalition. I think it's important to note that EAB and the CBA were concerned about the lack of studies regarding artificial turf in flood zones and in adjacent to our waterways. And in fact, the EAB recommended that the ordinance exclude Clearwater Beach, Sand Key, and Island Estates for those reasons. So we moved forward with the ordinance in December of that year, in 2011, and at the meeting, City Council ultimately did not have consensus, and the ordinance did not pass. So there have been some cases before the Municipal Code Enforcement Board for the installation of turf, and owners have been found in violation in this. I'd also like to remind you all that in 2022, this issue came up, and we had some code amendments that were moving forward, and we specifically amended the ordinance for that exclusion for parks and athletic fields. And then lastly, we have recently cited property owners for installing artificial turf, and we have had some folks come into compliance. They actually removed their artificial turf from their lawns, and then some have not. So if you think that you want to consider amending the community development code to expressly allow for it, I think there's quite a few things that you need to think about. And at this point, I've identified some. I don't know if I identified all, but I think I have a pretty good list, and I thought maybe we should walk through those things. The first thing would be to really decide if you would want to allow artificial turf for all uses in the city and all zoning districts, or limit it to commercial areas or to residential or to wherever you think it's appropriate. Should artificial turf be treated as pervious or impervious? Would you want to allow artificial turf to be located anywhere on a property, or would you want to somehow limit its use? For example, would you want to allow it only in rear yards or outside of required setbacks? What about in drainage swells, or how close to trees could it be located into their drip line? Would you want to allow it in the public right-of-way or only on private property? Also, another consideration would be how much would you like to have a limit on the maximum square footage? What would be some of the design standards that you think might be appropriate? Would you want to look at blade height, turf color, and turf materials? What would be important from an installation standpoint? So if you allowed it, should there be a permit and inspections to ensure that the standards that you might adopt and installment requirements be met? How would we, verify it otherwise? And if so, though, does staff have the knowledge and capacity to administer any new requirements for this? Another big issue, since there's a lot of requirements about how turf should be installed, would you want property owners to be able to install that themselves like they can remodel their home, or would you only want artificial turf companies doing that installation? And then what about maintenance? There is a maintenance obligation, and the industry information that I saw indicates that the lifespan of artificial turf is about 8 to 10 years, or maybe a little bit longer if you have like super high quality turf. And of course, that proper maintenance would include removing debris, regular wash downs to remove the contaminants such as dust and pet waste, unwanted pollen, and weeds. Also, this I did not know, is that you have to brush it so that you keep the blades standing upright and prevent them from matting down. And you also might need to deodorize the turf because sometimes they do trap odors, especially with pets. Food and drink spills have to be cleaned up, and you need to keep your turf away from fireworks and grills, and also keep furniture with sharp edges off of the turf because it can be damaged. So during the course of time, artificial turf seams can come apart, and weeds can actually grow on the top of it and also around the edges, and after a long-term use, it can fade, and or you can see it buckling. Sometimes, you see waves kind of out there. So I think one of the things that I think of in particular, since we do code enforcement, is how would we go about abating a violation if a property owner doesn't take care of the issue. It's easy to go out there and mow a grass or cut down overgrowth, but I don't think we would be able to do that with artificial turf. So I think that's a pretty comprehensive look at some of the things that you would want to discuss if you decide you want to move forward and allow artificial turf. But there's some other things, and the big, I think, elephant in the room would be the environmental considerations. And certainly there's different perspectives on this topic. The industry markets its product as being environmentally friendly and asserts several benefits, such as it reduces water consumption and use, it reduces the use of fertilizers, and it can prevent erosion. But those outside of the industry have another perspective, and while I'm not an environmental scientist, I have asked for some input from our sustainability engineering staff, as well as reviewed some information provided by Stetson Law and the IFAS program from the University of Florida and some other research that I've found, just to provide you the other perspective, starting with the manufacturing process of artificial turf, which is energy intensive and uses petroleum-based plastics and rubbers. Another concern is the heat island effect. Artificial turf has been found to increase ambient temperatures when compared to natural and other artificial surfaces, while natural grass reduces surface temperature and dissipates radiant heat in urban areas. Plastic grass has been found to absorb heat and sunlight and increase the temperature. So this could have a lot of negative impacts on our community, especially as our temperatures are rising, and it certainly could impact the cooling load of our air conditioning. So negative ecological effects have been found when turf has replaced natural surfaces. Natural grass traps and biodegrades airborne pollutants and provides wildlife habitats. This biodiversity, which is needed for water infiltration and retention, is lost with the installation of turf. Additionally, the installation of this man-made material requires the ground to be flattened and compacted and covered with gravel or crushed concrete as well as plastic in order to create this level surface that the turf can be laid upon. And the compaction of that ground underneath the turf causes higher volumes of stormwater runoff and lower infiltration rates. Artificial turf also does not support microorganism, which essentially removes the ability of decomposition from the ecosystem. And the concern with this is over time, runoff from plastic grass will contain waste which will enter our water bodies and impact water quality. And this concern also extends to the microplastics associated with turf entering our water body. I was given a study recently from environmental pollution that has actually studied in the actual artificial turf fibers, and they have been found to be in our oceans and our other waterways, and that study has found that they contribute significantly to plastic pollution. And then lastly, there's a concern about the disposal of artificial turf, obviously another very large plastic material. And according to the Stetson report that was presented to the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, theoretically it's recyclable, but it doesn't seem to be done. So there may be a couple other things that you want to think about. The Florida Friendly Landscaping Program does not consider artificial turf to be a Florida friendly product, and the specific concerns they have articulated are related to reduced groundwater recharge, increased heat, glare, and reduced wildlife habitat. Another thing that you may want to consider is the differences in quality. You know, to get that really high quality look, it's very, very expensive. And is this going to be something that maybe some neighborhoods can have and some neighborhoods can't if you set the bar very high? Lastly, I think having fake lawns in lieu of living plant materials really impacts your community aesthetics. So I think that that's a consideration that should be considered. And I think just sort of bottom line is amending the code to allow artificial turf consistent with your community's standards and strategic priorities of community well-being and environmental stewardship. So while I'm sure there's other things out there, I think that gives you a lot of things to think about and to discuss, and I hope it helps your frame your discussion. I do want to say that I think you were given another PowerPoint with your agenda item, and I just want to make sure that that's not interpreted to be something that we have submitted. It was submitted by someone in the industry, and he's not representing city staff, so I want to make that clear. So if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Questions, comments? Yes.
So, so this is another one of those topics where I can see both sides. However, after your presentation, we can very clearly understand the city's point of view. It was very comprehensive, you're right. I mean, when you went step by step on changing the permitting process, even I felt overwhelmed and I want to give up. But I guess that's the same with every other thing, right? I wish I did receive a comprehensive overview of what it takes to maintain grass. That's what I would like to know, because I've had properties with grass, and it is labor intensive, and I would wish I could have an astroturf that I can brush up once a week. I had it infected with pests, insects, gnats, which then brought it inside. And so all this data that's so quantitative tends to be, look what the turf does. I would like to see the same amount of attention to the grass. It is very hard to maintain grass in Florida. And a good example is Coachman Park. It was yellow because we couldn't use insecticides and fertilizer and all that. So when I read, let's say, just kind of so that you understand where I'm coming from, when I read the UF article, it was great reading. I mean, it gave us 9 points on how to be eco-friendly and how to do it naturally. But it's so general when it talks about turf. It does not take into any consideration the improvement and evolution of technology in the turfs. It does not take into account any of the positive in a quantitative way. And then when it talks about negative, it's referring to data from 2008 about the runoffs, right, and all that. But again, does not refer to, let's say, all the fertilizer and pesticides that we use next to the beach. You're telling me it doesn't run off into the ocean? So I wish, especially with such a controversial topic as this, I wish there was actually real comparatives versus the turf is bad, turf is bad, turf is bad. If we're going to make an educated decision, maintaining a healthy grass is also has detrimental consequences to it. In terms of the, like I said, the permitting, you know, I've always felt that we are not reactive or not proactive enough. Our environment changes all the time, and we need to adapt to it. When technology improves, we need to recognize it. We need to acknowledge, and we need to be open-minded instead of, you know, look how hard it's going to be to change the rules. At this point, I don't see, and I've done some research, I don't see anything conclusive that one that is not more detrimental than the other. And so, you know, it's very difficult. And having that conversation about the permitting is one more reason why I feel like we need to be a little bit more proactive. That presentation we received came up with some good points that we're not even acknowledging, you know, how permeable it is. At some points, even more so than grass. Like let's really look into the data before we make a decision, and not use the difficulty of permitting as a deterrent.
Councilmember Albritton.
Yeah, I guess I was kind of the one to maybe bring this up because I know we talked about it, was it last year, because we kind of noticed that we didn't really have it in our ordinance, and yet we were putting it in ball fields and putting it in parks, so that's kind of why it got back in there, but it left out, we could only put it in those two things that, of course, Clearwater had, and not give the advantage to any kind of residential uses. I looked up, we don't always have to invent the wheel. There's always somebody else that has done it for us, and they've got a lot of municipalities around Florida that have had this same talk and have, in one way or another, had an ordinance change to accept it in one way or another. I went over to a friend of mine in Dunedin that had it put in her yard, and it really looked great. And she said, it was several months ago, and we just had some really heavy showers, rains, and she was commenting that there was no standing water. It had absorbed very well, and she was glad she wasn't going to be using fertilizer and a lot of water on the yard to maintain it because it's expensive. And Pinellas, you can't even use fertilizers in the summer because of the runoff and the bloom in the Gulf. So I think I would be apt to looking at maybe limited ways that we could use it. I don't think I would like to have it in the right-of-ways and swales and things like that, but if somebody wanted to put it in their backyard, I know some people have it as a putting green, and really it's illegal to do that in their backyard. So I'd be amenable to doing limited versions of it. It has to be good material. I brought a sample last council meeting. I thought we were going to talk about it. I had a big mat about this big, and the stuff really is, now that they're putting out, it isn't like the stuff you buy at Home Depot, and put in your boat. It's thick stuff, and it actually has little follicles underneath that look like dead grass, it emulates real grass. And so I think it's worth a conversation, and maybe we can get through it this time instead of 2011, where we didn't have, everybody couldn't agree on it. Maybe we can come up with agreeable, all of us could agree on putting it somewhat in use in some of our residential areas.
Let me ask, I really appreciated your presentation, by the way. Very strong. Why do we get to use artificial turf, and yet we say to other individuals, no, you can't?
I think that you find them because artificial turf, the use of it originated in sporting facilities. I think the Houston Oilers was the first to actually use turf. So I think that it has a much longer history maybe in that, and then it started getting put in fields and, not necessarily anywhere else. I think this is a fairly recent phenomenon about an increase of people using turf in a residential setting. I think that when we brought the issue to you all, that you didn't want to amend the ordinance to allow it in other places when we amended the code in 2022.
And let me say this about the other presentation that you mentioned. About a month ago, the city manager said that the mayor's going to have to recuse on this one, and she was asking me if we want to have a presentation from the public. And I thought, well, yeah, that's a good idea. But looking at the presentation that was delivered to us, it really looks like an ad for a company. It's kind of like bringing in the head of Buick to say, the electric cars, you need to replace the entire fleet with Buicks. That's my advice. So I would think that Thursday night, it would probably be a good idea not to use that presentation, but the key points of it, certainly somebody can come up from the public and share those. That would be my preference. Councilmember Beckman, I imagine you have things to say.
I do, a couple things. Thank you for your presentation, Gina, with, you've got documented studies and reports. I think the Florida Friendly Landscaping from US is a very powerful document. I sit on the Tampa Bay Estuary Program Board, so I had asked for a presentation about artificial turf a number of months ago because residents had asked me about artificial turf, particularly ones who live on island estates. And so I received that one from the Stetson law student. One thing I think that wasn't mentioned, that was mentioned as part of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program discussion is that these fire retardant, PFAS chemicals, are frequently used in artificial turf so that they don't catch on fire. Well, PFAS, there are a number of lawsuits going on right now because I think they're in firefighters' uniforms and they're cancer causing and they leach into the water and the environment. And if you've got your artificial turf coated with PFAS chemicals, that's another thing that's really not good. And I think what's most important is that we have an ordinance, it's been on the books, and some residents did not correctly consult it. It was maybe during COVID, and that's unfortunate about their interpretation of turf, but as you pointed out, it's articulated in numerous parts of our documents what turf is considered, and it's living, something that's living. And also, we've since 2011 adopted Green Print 1, the first Green Print, as well as Green Print 2.0, and allowing artificial turf, especially looking at the 9 articulated reasons from Florida Friendly Landscaping, is not consistent with that. I understand, our discussion here about chemicals and pesticides and fertilizers, and well, if we're going to allow, it takes, that bad stuff is in the environment, so now we can have bad stuff with artificial turf. That doesn't, to me, just because one is bad doesn't mean the other one can be bad out here in our community as well. But I also think that when it really comes down to it, if we really want to be honest, what we really should be advocating for and perhaps incentivizing is our residents to use native drought-resistant landscaping. And part of the problem with pesticides and fertilizers and all that stuff is that people have an idea of what a beautiful lawn looks like, and it's not native to Clearwater, to Pinellas County, Florida, when we have no water and 90-degree days, and those types of lawns aren't going to look like a golf course year-round. And so it's just educating ourselves and deciding, what do we want? Do I want to put fertilizer, herbicides, and all that stuff out there to have a pristine lawn in July, August, and September? Or am I allowed to, should I be incentivized to let it go dormant, let it get a little brown and crunchy for a while, and then when the rain comes, it gets green? That's just part of nature, not fighting Mother Nature. When I had a single-family home, I live in a townhome now, but we lived on a curve, and we had up on a hill a little bit, clay all over the place, and nothing would grow. And so rather than continuing to mow that slope and try to nurse things along, I put in like creeping juniper, something that you couldn't kill, and you didn't have to fertilize and maintain. So you work with the environment you're in, really. If you really want to, be safe, limit chemicals, whether you're exposed to chemicals with artificial turf or with your fertilizers and all that, there really should be this societal shift. And, whether or not that's coming is who knows. But yeah, I think, I find your evidence incredibly compelling. I think it's data-driven and well-informed. And so, and I don't think staff has capacity to micromanage this nuanced type of, potential ordinance or flexibility there.
Mr. Delk.
Yes, Vice Mayor, I just want to comment kind of along with some of Gina's comments that from an industry standpoint, sometimes it's almost like confusing issues with like the ball fields, for example. Our landscape ordinance does not regulate the design and construction of ball fields. We don't, it doesn't, under the venue, for example, you've got a seated roof area. We could have, just as well have indoor, outdoor carpeting under there. We choose the turf plastic material because while you can do a lot of things with plastics, one of the things you can't do is make it go away very easily. So the turf product lasts a long time, but we don't put down artificial turf in our park where we landscape the park. The material that the seats are sitting on is not landscaping. So I think, I'd like to keep some distinction about that in mind when we talk about what we landscape and what we require to be landscaped versus ball fields where we don't dictate surface material of ball fields. So, and I think sometimes those issues get confused when we have this kind of discussion.
No, I appreciate that. I just wanted to see how we justify using it ourselves, but are saying no to others. Any other comments?
If I do want to make sure that there's not a misunderstanding about the permitting of it. If you're going to have installation standards and quality standards, we have to permit it because otherwise you're not going to see that. So my point is that if you allow it, it's another thing that we're doing, which is fine if that's what council wants. Where I think we have a little bit more difficulty is in the inspection part of making sure it's installed how the manufacturer says it should be installed, because that's not something that's, it's not a building code issue. It'd really be something probably that engineering would have to do, or we could always hire someone and have them certify that it was installed properly. If you look at the material that was presented, or that, they want to present Thursday night, there's a lot of things that have to be done to, get the ground properly prepared. And if we're going to permit it, then we need to make sure that they actually put it in how it's supposed to do, so it works, it percolates as, they say it might. So that's really my, my point about why I brought up permitting. It's not that we can't take it on, it's just sort of it's a little different than what we typically look at.
Any other comments? All right, I look forward to a lively discussion on Thursday night.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. City Attorney verbal reports.
Nothing right now.
Council discussion items, 14.1, Councilmember Beckman, Charter Review Committee recommendations.
Okay, so I thought it was important to give some time to the Charter Review Committee's report. At our last council meeting on a Thursday, we had received the written report earlier that day, and then we had the presentation by Mr. Hightower. So as Mayor Ongst rightly said, we didn't have a whole lot of time to process it, to make recommendations. But I did want to say, these people that we appointed met for like 16 weeks or so, Mr. Margolis, right? About 16 weeks, 30 hours or so?
I would defer to the clerk on that, but that sounds about right.
So twice a month since February through almost October.
Yeah. So I appreciate that significant amount of time, and I think we need to give, due diligence and be respectful of that and discuss their recommendations. I had reached out to Mr. Hightower to maybe have a conversation before, but we weren't able to do that. I wanted to, I don't know if you all have a copy of it in front of you or if you had any comments, but Mr. Hightower said many members had prior experience on a charter review committee and or city standing committee, which can be both good and bad. Wanted to, know a little bit more about that. I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to have people reappointed to the Charter Review Committee that have already served on it once. I think it's better to have a fresher look. And part of the recommendations too was to encourage more involvement from younger members of the community. My concerns there are, the time requirement, and then the time of day that they have the meetings doesn't seem to me real conducive to have younger people involved. And so we might want to think about that for the next one, which will be, in 5 years. And then the suggestions for the future, I think that first one, under 5, which says, an early explanation of the timeline for referendum preparation and submittal to council is the most critical. Because I know, I felt that this was truly presented at the very last minute, and that we need to either shorten the time that the charter review meets, or have the presentations for anything that may be on a ballot, to be to us by July or August would be really good. Oh, Mayor August? Oh,
No, you're good.
go ahead.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
I'm
wanted,
sorry, I didn't see that.
just to respond to that, I mean, if you don't mind.
No,
just
I
to
don't
go
care.
down
Yeah,
through.
we can, I'm good.
I'm fine with doing, what do they say, every 5 years? Right now, it's every 4.
No, I think it's every 5 right now.
It's every 5, but in essence, they do end up meeting every 4 years because they have to meet the year prior. So the recommendation
Right.
is on year 5, but they meet every 4 years.
So here's the problem with that I saw. Every 4 years is the year of an election. And if there are things that are like this year, that may be touchy things, then the council may not want to, based on an election year. I've seen that in several charter review committees. They bring things forward, and then some council members will be real, well, I don't know if I want to touch that because I'm being elected this year, so I'm going to be real careful. So I would like to see every 5, if you do it every 5 years, it kind of throws it out of that whole same time every, 4 years. We're just doing it on an off year.
So meet every 5
Or
for it to be implemented on the 6th.
Or either doing it, and then just stagger it where it's not on an election year. Just my 2 cents, I think it would be important.
But wouldn't it be an election year? Because they're even years for our
Every 2 years.
our rotated seats. So wouldn't it be?
It would be, you'd have to do it on because we're every 2 years, so it'd have to be on that off year.
Odd year.
Just to have to stagger it to make it on an off year between election years.
So
We don't have an election every year.
if they would have met starting in February of '24,
Yeah.
and then it comes forward for
Yes.
March of, so that would not be an
25,
election
it will not be any election.
And maybe we just need to stagger it like that the first time, and then you can do it every 5 years and always be on an off year.
But it's still somebody's election year
No.
coming up. Well,
25 wouldn't be.
but is there an election? What time, March? We have March elections? We don't have
No, we're not having
March elections every year.
Well, I guess
Yeah,
we'd have to
we'll
see
see-
if the
we'll see what
referendum
happens on
passes,
March
because it's going to make the whole thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's just something I've seen. In fact, the last charter review when we made it, I'm thinking, it seems like we're always talking about it on an election year. So maybe we ought to see if this referendum passes, and then accordingly, if we can make it so it just hits on a non-election cycle, it might be better. I don't know how we do it. I guess we'd have to look at it and see how we
Well,
would.
feedback I've gotten is that, from people who have been on it in the past, is that they meet too frequently. But I agree with what Councilmember Beckman said, that we need to have a tighter calendar so it comes forward, so they understand that, so they have their meetings.
Yes.
One of the problems they had this time is they had a hard time getting the quorum in a lot of meetings. And some people didn't show up, and, there was a group of 3 people that showed up all the time, Mr. Johnson being one of them. So I think if we maybe condense it, and we just, let them know, look, if you want to be appointed to this, we need you to show up. And we need to get your work done by, I would say, beginning of September, maybe end of August, and then that gives us time. But that's just one of some things that we could look at.
Okay. So I think the direction is we've got to start either earlier or finish, definitely finish earlier. And I would propose, the recommendations by, no later than the middle of August or something. Their suggestions also included earlier start on efforts to recruit members to enhance the pool of applicants. And I think, opening it up for people to apply, rather than just us, throwing in names, might be good. A more broad, go ahead. Did we miss something?
No, that's okay. So a couple of things that I'd like to just, regarding the meetings, the committee actually does determine when they meet. So we give them, they basically met around the same time in the afternoon, but some of them have met a little earlier, some have met a little later. That's one. But two, the application, there is an application process. And for this committee, I had opened it, I think at the beginning of November, the end of October, somewhere around there, for that time frame. But there is an application process. I think the issue may be in terms of where the council members select names. That's just a historical way of how the council has appointed the members to each, and then whoever is remaining, then it would be a consensus. But that's how the selection process was. But
And we didn't have many. Didn't we have like only one or two extra?
no. So that was one of the main things. I could not provide an agenda item because I did not have the bare minimums. That was one issue with this committee. Despite working with public communications to get the word out, I think I even asked council to get the word out as well. We just did not have the individuals. The other thing that I did want to note is the recommendation regarding younger members. We did during the last charter review committee, we did have somebody who just graduated high school, was a college student who was, so it's rare. I think it's not so much the timing, it's just interest. So sometimes there's just not interest to be.
We can be aspirational and try to work towards it. Certainly, the council has patience to allow the committee to do its work is critical. Their recommendation that each individual council member attends at least one meeting, I think that's valid. And I went to a number of meetings at the last charter review process and was able to speak. I wasn't elected at that time. And so I'm wondering if when I attend advisory board meetings, I'm not allowed to speak. What do you envision, or what might be the protocol if an elected attends the charter review?
So in the past, council members who did attend, when it was something specific, so if there was a council recommendation for the committee to act upon, then sometimes council members would speak. The other time that they would speak is if they were talking about form of government, and then we would invite not just outside council members, elected officials from other cities regarding form of government. Our own council members were invited as well. But in general, it's not to speak because it is the council's opportunity from the days to provide that direction to council as a group, not to attend meetings individually and provide direction to the committee, because it's not one individual. It needs to be from the actual council. And that's one of the things that the practice has been, is not to, if you do attend, you can attend and you can speak at the end under citizens to be heard. But the idea is not to infringe, so that the individuals on the committee can freely speak and decide where they want to go and not feel pressured to go in one direction or another.
Yeah, not this last charter review, but the one prior to that, I think I went to 3 meetings and I felt really awkward because I sat back, I didn't speak, but it might have been the ones you were attending. And the subjects that they were talking about involved me, and I thought, I probably shouldn't be here. I mean, I felt really awkward. So if I'm invited to speak, I would be glad to do that, but just to show up and listen to what they're talking about, I think is probably not a...
Well, I think one thing is what I know the county did this time was they invited the constitutional officers and the county commissioners and asked them what were priorities that they would like to see, and just for input. And then that was it. Then you don't have to go back to other meetings and just sit there and feel awkward because they're talking about stuff. So that might be something that could be incorporated. Or maybe the mayor goes, or an appointee from the council, and says these are 3 or 4 things the council's discussed that we might want to look at.
And that discussion was held, so that discussion was held prior to the committee meeting. So when council appointed, direction was requested. And so I think that's one of the reasons why council members don't provide direction, because it's really the group, it's the collegial body providing direction to the committee.
Okay.
And we said not to look at our form of government.
And that wasn't included now. I will have to say, up to this point, it's always been practice. There's always been a discussion on form of government, but I think we also had that recent referendum on form of government that did not pass. So it may have been too soon for the committee to even think it was even worth discussing.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, I've been on both sides of it, where I was on a board and council attended, and then the flip side. And then I listened to most of the tapes from those meetings, and I think I would have impacted the meeting had I been there, due to all the conversations that occurred. Some were very heated, and I think that if I was there, it would have altered the conversation. And at the end of the day, I want them to feel safe to say whatever they want to say, and at times they really did. So if they want us to attend, okay, but if you think about it, if we each attend one, that's 5 meetings that we are imposing ourselves in that conversation. So I'm willing, I'm just wondering if that has a negative impact.
Yeah, whatever, I'm open, I'm just throwing it out there, so.
There are recommendations for the actions. So the first one about if council members fail to attend 3, change it to 3 consecutive regular council meetings, unless such an absence is excused by the council. I don't see any urgency in this, because I don't think we have that kind of problem right now. Number 2 is kind of moot, because we've already decided that. Number 3, I don't know if people want to move it to 6 years, but I think I need a little more information about how that really lines up with election systems and stuff. I mean, dates of, and I think we'll see what this referendum is. And then, we didn't really allow them to voice that in a timely manner and respond to them to retain the current voting system. I think number 5 is a good one. Recommend that the city investigate districting with the support of an outside consultant. I would say, while everyone up here except me voted to put the ballot initiative on to change our form of voting system, I would say, are you well versed in the pros and cons, and to really have a thoughtful discussion out in public about that, and, with voters who may approach you about why did you do it that way, and what are the pros and cons, and so to me, I think having an expert come and present to us about that would be really informative, and it would allow our residents to tune in and listen as well. And at that time, they could talk about, a plurality versus a runoff, as well as what's involved if your city wants to consider districts. Yeah. I mean, go on. He's I don't feel like I should call on somebody, I'm just, but it is a collegial discussion, right?
I think I'm well-versed enough that I've been invited to speak to the Edgewater neighborhood tomorrow night about runoffs, so that's what I'm doing. Anyway.
So, I just wanted to make a comment on this, the districting thing, because here's what happened when we were talking about strong mayor. You had a person come in, an ICMA representative, to talk about, that side of it. And I think if you're bringing in somebody that's a consultant that is going to push for districting,
I don't want to hear it.
I really don't want the one-sided conversation. I can tell you this, Rose, who was that professor that we had? He was, what was the name? Scott Payne.
About ranked choice voting.
What a great guy. I did a MPOAC with him in Orlando, and I'll tell you what, he knows both sides of everything. And I would be fine to have somebody like that come in that could say, well, then on one hand and then on one hand another. He'd be a great one to have. So
and that's what I think
Yeah.
is needed. Yeah. Recommend that the council membership be increased to 7 members in an effort to have more inclusion in decision-making. I don't know enough about that. I wonder what the charter review is thinking about as being more inclusive, what that looks like, what the expectations are. But I think, there may be pros and cons to having it increased to 7 members. I think we need more feedback about that.
The pros would be all the committees that we have to go besides this,
Could be spread out
it
more.
would be spread out more. I think some of them were thinking that maybe more would be better in that case. But I think there's pros and cons on both sides.
Yeah, I don't really support that, but that's my opinion.
You don't support
I
having...
don't support having 7 council members, no,
Okay.
for Mr. Jones's hearing.
Would you have us...
That's why I said it again.
But would you support having a discussion, an expert come and give a presentation about that?
About the 7 members?
Yeah, about what does it mean for a council to expand to 7 members? Largo has 7 at-large members.
Yeah, I don't think that works very well. I don't know. I wouldn't support it, but, I'm only going to be here through March, so you guys do what you
Yeah,
want to do.
but I think education is always a good thing.
As long as it's an unbiased person who's not getting paid to push one agenda, which happens.
absolutely.
And
That's it.
I know
that's
it
a
happens.
concern.
And again, I go back to if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I think we do fine with 5, and I don't mind putting in the extra hours on the,
I don't really, I'll just say it, I don't think the staff likes that.
That's true, I'd like to hear the staff's input on that. That would mean an extra
Maybe
2
I
hours.
put them on the spot, but I don't think that's something that they're crazy about.
Let's move it along.
So, yeah.
I think the other 7, 8, and 9 are, can be policy unless the number 9, section 2.01, is about annual key performance indicators and objectives for the city manager and city attorney positions. I had advocated for this strongly in the last charter review committee meetings, and I think it's incredibly important for us to make sure that the 2 people we hire and fire, city manager and city attorney, have annual measurable goals. And I also think it's incredibly fair and respectful to them if we can agree on 2 or 3, and, we could say that, to have 3 annual measurable goals or something, so that they're not trying to appease 5 different people on things that they're going to be evaluated on. And I just think it's good governance. I think it's good to have measurable goals that the city manager and city attorney would decide upon, shape, or suggest to us, and then we all agree on the 3. I see that as certainly doable with a 5-member council. And then we use those to evaluate them transparently, in October.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And I think we just have to do it up front. Obviously, I stepped in this in the middle of it, so I wasn't really,
I kind of do that
I
anyway.
got Mr. Margolis's goals, and he showed me, and then what he thought, but anyway, no, I think if you start up front, that's good.
Yeah. And then it wasn't always that way. You could just have a conversation.
Right.
Nothing had to be produced or presented to the public. So that would be a referendum. Is that correct, Mr. Margolis? That would have to go on the ballot?
Yeah, wouldn't that just be an ordinance?
Well, let me answer 2 different answers to that question. The Charter Review Committee itself has proposed it for inclusion in the city charter. So what the committee proposed is that this would actually go in the charter, which would require a referendum. However, there are several things that the Charter Review Committee are proposing to put in the charter that do not have to go in the charter. They're things that could instead be accomplished by ordinance. And so this is one of them that could be accomplished by ordinance or council rule without going in the charter. And there are a few other examples like that that I can kind of see throughout this. There's nothing prohibiting it from going in the charter, but it's also something that could be done by ordinance without a referendum. So that gets into that larger philosophical question over what do you believe goes in the constitution of our city?
Yeah, I don't think that's
And that's the-
necessary in the charter.
That's the question.
I definitely agree, and I've had this conversation with both. I can't imagine having 5 diverse bosses like this, and that's why when I evaluated this year, I was clear in saying, and this is the criteria I will be evaluating in the next year. At least I've given them very clear parameters to work in instead of, so I agree with that. I don't mind having some kind of objective evaluation process at all.
So we could maybe give you direction to try to compose an ordinance, and then I think it's important to tie those goals to our strategic plan as well. So however you want to, word it, but certainly, you've got the strategic plan front and center as far as guiding budget decisions, guiding staff, priorities, evaluations, and it should fit so nicely with our,
How do you do that with the city attorney, then?
we've got good governance and transparency, and, adequate staffing and training. Those are some of the goals you had with me, as far as your measurables.
I did. My suggestion would be this. Because this will give a different level of definition than what we have right now, the charter already provides annual reviews for both the city manager and the city attorney. It may be best to start this off with a council rule, just because a council rule is more pliable, and it's something that may be changed. As you have different elected officials who come into office, they might have their own views on what it should say. So my suggestion procedurally would be if I were to draft a council rule for this,
Makes sense.
and then bring that back. As far as the substance of it, I don't have any problem with this. In the sense that, I'm accountable, and the manager is accountable to the council, and you're accountable to our voters. That's how our system of government is supposed to work. I'm a firm believer in that. I have no objection to that. What I do think is likely to happen, however, and probably a little bit more so for the manager than for me, just because of the nature of what she does, it is not going to be easy for council to reach consensus on what you view as the top priorities. We all see on the dais, right? All 5 of you have different views on a lot of things. So ultimately, what may end up happening is that an individual council member may propose, say, one particular goal. Could be for the manager, it could be for myself, but then that may not be shared by other members of the dais, and so it just dies on the vine. Or it's made as a motion and seconded, but then it dies on the vine. And so the notion that council is going to be unanimous in these goals, I think, is aspirational, but probably not realistic, to be candid. As Councilmember Teixeira pointed out, the manager and I do have 5 very different bosses at this point in time, and so I just want to prepare council for what may end up happening, which could be a situation in which an individual council member proposes a goal, and then that gets completely rejected by the rest of the council. And so it may be that the outcome of this is that 3 council members effectively set the entire agenda for everything. Again, not as much of an issue for me, because just the nature of my goals are more likely to be consensus building, but probably a little bit more so for the manager. So just bear in mind that could be the outcome of this, and it could be some pretty harsh consequences. It could lead to potentially 2 council members always getting sidelined in that conversation if you have a majority vote that is always setting the agenda for the managers. And again, it could be for me too, but just the nature of what I do is not as likely to cause that. So just keep that in mind.
Perhaps instead of focusing on the goals that we have to vote on, and maybe 2 of us won't, or 1 won't have their goals, maybe just approve a standardized evaluation format where we're all looking at the same criteria. Perhaps we can start off with something like that, which is standardized, and they are both being evaluated transparently, and we're all working off of the same parameters. Maybe that
We kind of did that last year.
Yeah, just
Sort of.
come up with a You know what I mean? What are your thoughts?
I think that's good. I mean, what I did was I asked Jennifer, and David, like, what are 3 SMART goals you have for next year that are tied to, looking forward and the things that we're doing, opening Coachman Park and, Phillies agreements and all that stuff. So looking ahead, what do you think were 3 goals for next year? And put them in SMART form. So, measurable and attainable and all that stuff. And so she did. And then I didn't give her a whole bunch of feedback on, those seemed reasonable. And so we went with those 3 goals. But
There probably weren't my 3 goals. So that's, you made a good point. It's like I don't want to make it harder for them to succeed. I want to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if we have just a standardized form that we can begin with, at least they will understand throughout the year, and they can refer back to it as a guideline of what our expectations are.
I guess so. So then I just see that if you're tailoring your goals, David and Jennifer, to each council member. So if we sit down and say, okay, what are your SMART goals? 3 SMART goals related to strategic plan this year. Do you envision yourself, potentially having 15 different goals?
I wouldn't start with that. No, my plan would be to give you all the same goals, but that doesn't mean the feedback from you all would be the same. So for example, what I might think are, the 3 main priorities, you might not agree with, and so that's how they would then change. But no, I would not go into it with different goals for each of you.
Yeah, I don't
For-
think
you know what I mean?
I don't think it has to be that difficult. I think you provide goals, we sit down and say, okay, yeah, these are my priorities, these are Councilmember Beckman's priorities, she tells, but they're in those goals that you provide. And, I don't think it has to be any more difficult than that. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel, and I think we can get something, and, without belaboring this discussion at this point, we can get some things coming forward in the next couple months or whatever, because we got plenty of time. And then, say, okay, this is what we're gonna do, this is gonna be a council rule, and this is how we're gonna do it.
So like, we are agreed, SMART goals tied to the strategic plan and agreed on between each council member and the city manager or city attorney individually, so not collectively, which is fine. I don't think that they vary that
provide
much.
a series of goals, and we say, yeah, I like these, and have at it.
What do you think?
Okay.
Does that would make your job easier?
It's hard to project without knowing the response to each of the goals, in some regards, I think it's fine because you all approve the strategic plan. And so should not, as long as you all didn't approve it from the dais and then have a different idea in terms of what a priority would be, then no, that should be totally fine because that's what it would be derived from. So just, as long, and we did, this year was unanimous on our strategic plan. That's a great year for this, to do that. I don't know if it'll always be that way or not. It would be great if it was. So, I don't have a problem with that.
If I just one more point. So part of the Charter Review Committee's recommendation here also included each council member presenting a written evaluation report, which includes comments, et cetera. Is that something I am including in the rule? Because traditionally, I think each council member's kind of had different views on whether to create that sort of written document, whether you don't want to, et cetera. Is that something we want to include as a mandate for council? And if so, what will be the enforcement mechanism if a council member just says, no, I don't believe in doing that?
That's dicey. I think you may recommend it, but if they just want to do a verbal report like Mayor Hibbert preferred to do, or like I prefer to do, as long as you're going by the goals, you're talking about the goals, and you're looking at them, I don't think you mandate it. And then, like you said, how do you enforce it if they say, no, I'm not doing that?
Evaluation form should be enough, and then verbal, because the conversation didn't just happen one time. It's this constant conversation back and forth. And so I understand for transparency and for standardizing, yes, let's have a form, standardized, objectives and whatever, and goals, that's fine. But I do not feel comfortable writing a dissertation about every single thing. First of all, I can't write it all. There's just so many things that happens on a daily basis. I mean, sometimes on an hourly basis, it's like, yeah, we need a diary.
She's all good things, of course.
Oh, good, great things.
All right, so that's not included. All right, what else do we want to talk about?
Well, number 11, so we're on the last few, but number 11 is recommend to council that it discuss continuing education for new council members from Florida League of Cities and FEMA. I was wondering, I don't know exactly what they were thinking there along those lines. I mean, we take our annual ethics recertification, and I don't know about FEMA, so.
Yeah, I think that's fine, what we do with the ethics. I think everyone else, yeah. I don't think we need to do any further than that. Anyone else want to pitch in on that?
I always thought that, and I don't know how you do it, I think I understand what they're saying, because when I became a council member, there's a lot of things that, I had been through a lot of different boards in the city, but there are a lot of things I didn't really realize. And it would have been helpful to me, I don't know how you do it, there's not a class you can take, here's what it's like to be a council member. But maybe almost like what we do with people that want to know more about Clearwater. Maybe we should have, I don't know if you can make it mandatory, I don't know if I want to do that, but it sure would be helpful to go through something before, even when you want to run to be a council member, to say, this is the job.
So,
Oh, excuse me.
there is something available. So I think what the committee was wanting is making sure that council members continue their education efforts. For instance, the Florida League of Cities, they have the EMO, which is for newly elected officials. It goes through forms of government and what to expect in terms of, as a newly elected council member, and they even have an advanced level of that. And they also, the Florida League of Cities now has introduced a new continuing education kind of, not just legislative priorities, but just items that they feel elected officials in Florida should know. So I think it was more along the lines of keeping council members engaged. It's not just about getting elected. You're going to be involved in so many other regional committees that there is a continuing education process, and they wanted to, that was a recommendation. But I provide that information when those opportunities are available besides the ethics training, the annual ethics training. I provide that to your administrative assistant to make sure that she shares that with you.
Okay,
That's fine.
all right. What
And
else?
then the recommendation, they want to recommend to amend the charter section by adding the following verbiage about if we need to let a city manager have that city manager removed. Mr. Margolis, do you have any fleshing out of that one?
Well, I know that the discussion around the committee came up, it was brought up, I believe, by Mr. Hightower, if I recall. That was something, and Mayor Hibbert had talked about that as well, based on the last experience with the prior city manager. There is, I would say, a little bit of a gap right now in the charter where if a city manager is voted to be removed by a 3-2 vote, then it requires 2 separate readings, which is fine. I think that's a good thing that helps protect against, overreactions and things of that nature. But during that period of time of 2 weeks to 3 weeks between the first reading and the second reading, as the council knows, that was a long, 3 weeks, right? It was very long for everyone. It was even longer because it was over the holidays. And so people were traveling, things of that nature. What probably would have been best in that situation had been if Mr. Jennings had appointed an acting city manager during that time while he was out of the office. But there's nothing really obligating him to do that, and he did not. So that left kind of an awkward period for the city during that few weeks between first and second reading. This is something that the Charter Review Committee discussed as a way to mitigate that. However, this is already something that is in Jennifer's contract. I was not here when John was hired as a city manager, right? He and I were hired around the same point in time, so I was not involved in drafting his contract. But Jennifer's contract, I was here for that, and this is actually more or less in her contract already. If that were to ever happen to her, God forbid, then it would say that she has to go on leave during that time And if she failed to do that or refused to do that, she'd be ineligible for severance. And so the hammer is a pretty big financial hammer. And, I don't think any city manager is going to forego their severance to be petulant for 2 weeks of time. So that's a pretty big hammer that's already in that employment contract. And if for whatever reason we ever had a different city manager, that's something I'd probably recommend to the city, for now, from all time. So I'm not sure that it's necessary to be in the charter, given that we already have the mechanism now in the contract to actually accommodate that. The only part that council may want to weigh in on is the question over who is going to serve as city manager during that 2 weeks or 3 week time period. But it's a very short time period. As it stands right now, in Jennifer's contract, it says that if she were on leave, she would appoint, I think, one of the 2 ACMs to serve in her place. To me, that's a very reasonable way to handle it. It's a very short period of time.
Yeah, I don't think it should be specified who the individual is, because things are always fluid, and you never know.
Exactly.
Right.
Their personal situation.
And that's actually what I was gonna tweak it, because you're right, I think the way the contract is written, I think is fine, instead of identifying already somebody that's gonna be replaced based on tenure as one of the criteria. I think what has.
I feel like, this was a valid issue, which I understand based on the recent experience, why that was brought up. I certainly don't think they brought it up in any way intending to critique our current manager. As someone who sat there through all of those charter review committee meetings, I can assure the council that the entire tenor of the conversation was looking backwards at John and thinking about what happened there. So no one.
It was awkward.
It was. We all remember it. And so I just wanted the council to know that no one was sitting there thinking, is this what we're going to do to Jennifer? So it was not like that. But they were, I think their minds were in the right place to try to guard against that awkwardness that Councilmember Albritton just mentioned. But given that we already have provisions now in an employment contract to deal with it, I think that solves 95% of this, my opinion.
I would agree.
And then the last one is their recommendation to add a preamble to the charter, the "We the People of the City of Clearwater," all that. So,
I just don't see that as necessary, but,
Yeah.
does that have to go to a referendum?
Based on the way that it's been proposed, because the committee was asking to add it to the charter, it would in fact have to go to referendum.
I don't want to see another referendum. I guess, it would be, when would we do it, this year?
Let's see, today is November 13th. It's tight, but maybe you could still get it on for March, theoretically, if the council wanted.
Second reading.
Yeah. Theoretically, if the council wanted to do it, it would be on for March. Alternatively, it would be in the August 2024 primary election. It'd be one of those two, right? It would either be our March 2024 municipal election, or it would be the August 2024 state and federal primary election, whichever the council prefers. But if the council did want to put this on a ballot for March, I would need to know that today, for sure.
well, why don't we save it for a discussion with the next council, I guess, so they could you could have them take this recommendation up after the next election and see if they want to put it on perhaps in August 24th?
If that's what the council would like to do.
Sounds reasonable to me.
Yes.
Yep, agreed.
Okay. And then the only other one was their consensus to have the city attorney draft language recommending that the council evaluate and discuss our base salaries every 2 years. That's just policy about, 2 years is pretty, frequent.
I just don't think that belongs in the charter. I can't imagine it as a referendum question.
I think that's policy, yeah.
Yeah. I think you guys can discuss that with the new council if you want to do that. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
No,
Anyone
I
else on
think
that, on these items? No? Okay.
gave them due diligence and thoughtful
Yes.
discussion.
All right,
That's
thank you.
really
I
good and
appreciate that.
respectful.
So the next item I brought up, and I've spoken with both the city manager and the attorney about this. I am not comfortable with three of us serving on the pension advisory committee. If I remember correctly, and Rosemary, I don't know if you can find this, but I think back in the day, I was the only elected official on that, and I was the chair, and the rest were firefighters or other departments. I would prefer appointing I'm not comfortable on that board for various reasons, and I won't go into why. Especially with some of the topics that are coming up, and it has nothing to do with somebody's pension. I would prefer to be able to appoint someone that the council agrees with, that's a professional in the financial field, or an accountant, or someone like that. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, right now, Mr. Margolis, how does it read? It reads that 3 people, either council members, are appointed by the council. Is that what it reads?
Yes, sir. That
So
is
it's not changing
exactly how it reads. And I'm not aware of any other restrictions currently in the ordinance as far as who you'd like to appoint. So, for example, if the council wants to appoint a citizen, a staff member, I mean, there's no real restrictions on that. It's council as a body. It's 3 appointments. So it's up to you to decide whether it's 3 council members, whether it's 1 council member, 2 citizens, completely up to you.
So this past week was we had 2 cases that added up to over 3,000 pages of medical records to read. And I was going over it, and I could see that I was flipping over some very quick. And I thought to myself, does the lay person even know that that's insignificant? You know, all the ECGs and all that stuff. And I was going over the record, and there's so many conflicting opinions, and I'm thinking, how does a layperson go through this? You know, do they really know the implications of a bicuspid versus tricuspid? That you're born with it, and what? And so I was thinking, you know, if we're not going to have 3 council members, which I'm perfectly okay with just 1, if we're going to appoint someone, I think we need somebody in the medical field that can actually read these charts and actually have the knowledge to make an educated decision. Because right now, we have someone representing police, someone representing fire, and then council. I would love to see a physician up there, a nurse.
Mr. Hightower,
and Mr. Hightower who's legal.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, you know, when I look at these charts, even I even have to print it out to compare because of such conflicting information. And I just think that these are very important decisions that involve taxpayers' money. And some of these medical conditions are very intricate, dealing with versus idiopathic versus, you know, injury. And if we're going to replace these 2 or 3 nominated, you know, council members, it should be, I think, somebody in the medical field.
Okay. Any other input? So, yes.
Do we want 3 people from the medical field then to replace the 3 of us?
No, I don't think we need to do that. I think if you're comfortable being on it, that's fine. If you're comfortable being on it with your background, I'm just not comfortable with it. And it's not a matter of time or anything. I had to miss the last meeting. I wasn't in town, but it's just not something that I think I should be doing. I'll leave it at that. So, I mean, if I bring somebody forward as a recommendation, or someone knows somebody who wants to bring forward, then we can talk about it, and whether it's a medical field or whether it's someone else.
Well, should we have
What's the criteria?
applications? Yeah.
How does that
So
work?
I would recommend that instead of bringing names forward, that if you want me to open up 2
That's
seats for applications, to do so. And so it must be a city resident. If you wish to have medical background or whatever background you would like, then I can add that to the details regarding membership, but I would definitely recommend an application process.
So are we going to ask for 2 seats, or, I mean, we want to have still 1 council member on? I mean, what's your preference? I'm not trying to tell you what you need to do in your position, or you, so.
I'm fine, either way.
Okay. What do you think? Ms. Margolis, do you think we need 1 council person on there or not?
Well, I mean, if we think about a lot of the other committees, right, I mean, the having 1 council member is common, you know, everything from, you know, PSTA, Fort Pinellas, although there's needed 2, knock on wood here. But having a council member is not a bad thing to probably keep an eye on matters. Okay. But that said, I mean, for context, I mean, the default under Florida law is is actually a 5-member board, and that 5-member board is comprised of 2 people appointed by the employees, or elected by the employees, 2 appointed by the city, and then 1 who is appointed by the other 4. That's kind of actually the default setup, is that 5-member board. So there are a lot of cities, Orlando included, that had no elected officials serving. So it would not be unreasonable to have 0 on that committee. However, given in Clearwater, we have some different things to think about, I think, than a lot of other cities do. One of the things that makes Clearwater different is the fact that we have a single pension fund. That single pension fund includes our police officers, our firefighters, and our general employees. That's very different from most cities. Most cities either no longer have a pension plan for their general employees. Candidly, Orlando had closed theirs many years before I got there. Or even for the public safety plans, a lot of them segregate the police and fire plans. So because Clearwater has one omnibus plan, there are some advantages to that. There have been some economies of scale. I think that Clearwater has gotten, as a result of that, some efficiencies in the management of the plan. I think there have been a lot of positive things for Clearwater, but one of the, I don't want to say disadvantages, but one of the things to watch out for in having a single plan like this is that when the PAC is making decisions, these decisions not only affect that one employee or even that class of employee, but it's the same pension fund that belongs to everyone. And so there are some pretty major ramifications that go just beyond either that individual applicant or that individual classification of employee. And that makes Clearwater different, I think, than some other cities. So my personal suggestion would be it might not be a bad thing to still have one council member keeping an eye on what goes on there on that committee, but I don't know that we need more than one council member there. My 2 cents.
So why don't we advertise for 2, and then we can talk about, if we get enough candidates, what we want to do. I would think medical, but I would think financial or accounting background also, either or, because I mean, what if we can't find somebody with a medical background?
So is there consensus for medical or financial background?
Preferred, the word preferred.
Preferred. And, if somebody shows up that's a well-rounded individual that's been involved with a lot of stuff that we trust, and, if they don't have those kind of backgrounds, we can always, doesn't mean we can have to tell them no.
And just further clarification, just to make it clear, you would like for the individual to be a Clearwater resident, so reside within city limits.
Is that what?
So all advisory boards, unless otherwise, and I don't believe there is an exemption for the PAC, you are a city resident.
Okay, then yes.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's their tax money that's.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay?
Yep.
We all ready? All right, thank you. Let's see, we have Councilmember Teixeira with the resolution.
So you all have received the resolution. I think it speaks for itself. Does anybody wants to make any comments at this?
I like our city one that's there,
Correct.
the option.
I agree. Yes?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Perfect.
Okay?
Thank you for doing that. That was good.
Yes, thank you. Okay, Councilmember Beckman.
Okay. Is this the last one? Is it?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it,
Or no, you have 2.
You got 2.
oh, is it, which one's first? Oh, the League of
Suncoast
Cities.
League of Cities.
Okay. I was going to be asking you all what you thought some of your priorities might be, because the Suncoast League of Cities needs to, we're sharpening up ours as well, so I've got our list of legislative priorities. That's fine. I don't need anything else. You know what I
Okay,
mean?
all right,
So-
great. And then the
And then-
HAC update.
Yeah, the AHAC. So this is the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee workshop. So we have the Neighborhood Affordable Housing Advisory Board, which meets year-round, that has residents on it. And then a few months out of the year, it switches. Most of those members become part of the AHAC, which is required by the state. And then you add a few more members, Community Development Board member, I sit on it. And that's in order to get the state funding. And part of that requirement is I, as the elected official who sit on that board, has to attend 2 regional meetings of people, other electeds who sit on that AHAC, their AHAC, to share what are you doing for affordable housing and more housing in your communities. So I just wanted to share a little bit of what others are doing. We had a meeting on October 4th, regional, and there were some key topics that were discussed, and I'll just go through these. I can share this document with you that was provided from the Florida Housing Coalition. So Cody Glazer is the attorney that works for the state Florida Housing Coalition. He leads these meetings. Key topics that we talked about were the role of community land trusts in stewarding public resources. We don't have a whole lot of opportunity for that because we don't have a whole lot of large property swaths for a community land trust of, it's like a neighborhood that the city manages that property. Repurposing hotels and other vacant office or shopping centers into housing, I think is something that we need to look at, as well as churches. So different municipalities talked about utilizing church-owned property for affordable or workforce housing development. And we have First United Methodist Church, St. Paul's, and then that Unity Church nursery that I'm aware of that have sold parts of their, if not their entire congregation and property. And they're struggling, and I'm wondering how many, or if they've had conversations with the city about, hey, we've got some property that we can't afford anymore, our congregation is down, and we'd be willing to negotiate with the city first. So I think that that's something that we need to look at. How do we put, a welcome flag out that we'd like to have those conversations before they get sold to somebody else? A number of municipalities, and I think it's Broward here, is they're setting up their own trust fund. So where we have the Sadowski Trust Fund in the state that's been rated for years and years and years and isn't totally fully funded with doc stamps the way it was set up, now these municipalities are setting their own housing trust funds up, which is pretty interesting. Let's see, I'll just go through a couple. Tampa shared recent affordable housing budget victory where they appropriated an extra $5 million into affordable housing with city funds. Tampa discussed how several hotels have recently approached the city about conversion into affordable housing, included rapid rehousing of families. Oops, excuse you. Bless you. Bradenton, currently they're revamping their AHAC policies and involvement, including in-house cleanup of bylaws and membership. I've asked before about having an AHAC that operates year-round. Most cities do that and not, separate it into a NAHAB. Again, it would be an elected official that would sit on that, but I think it's worthwhile. It's a critical issue here. Pinellas County, we had a representative from Pinellas County there. I think it was Commissioner Scott who talked about incentives for affordable housing such as expedited permitting, density increase, reduction of setbacks, zero lot line fee waivers, and increased maximum square footage for ADUs and more. We're already doing a number of those things, which is good. I shared with us our new grassroots organization, the Clearwater Alliance for Housing, that is out there attending meetings and learning and starting some real grassroots advocacy. I also talked about how we are connecting our sustainability plan with our housing plan, and we're starting to put solar on those homes of low, moderate income people with a 24-unit place in Lake Bellevue. Collier County discussed, and we have a housing study that's going to be presented to us in January, but Collier County discussed how recent housing data included the point that 60% of their recent transactions are in cash. And, I know you're looking for a house, and I don't know if you're getting feedback for that.
Again, I don't know how young people do it, or people that just, are average employees down here and making an average salary. Anyway, thank you for that update. We appreciate it. Any other new business from anyone? Yes, sir.
I'd like to start up a conversation at some point on our downtown properties that are just sitting there empty. I go by I know we've all done it. We go by these properties that used to be vibrant, and they've been bought up, and they're just sitting on them. They're not even making an effort to rent them. I mean, I used to get upset with some of the property owners downtown. At least they made an effort to try to get people to come in. Maybe it wasn't the right effort, but we've got so many properties now that are just sitting there. Is there, and I guess this would be a question for you, what could we do? I know property rights, I'm a big property right guy, but, you know, these are commercial properties in a downtown area that we have a CRA and a DDB. They should have to at least try to have some economic value instead of just sitting there. And I'm wondering could we incentivize them to try to get somebody in there by putting something together that has a fine attached to it or some kind of monetary fee that if they don't participate in the economic of our downtown or the economy of our downtown that we can, I know other municipalities have had the same thing and they have imposed some kind of an ordinance on that.
Didn't we queue up an ordinance when we were first elected, like 3.5 years ago? There was one queued up and got put on the shelf, kind of, because, you know, Mayor Hibbert said I'd rather have a carrot than a stick, but it was kind of like a registration fee that would
Yes.
increase if
We
it
talked about
remained
it.
vacant. And we had that drafted by Pam, and it's still there. We decided not to enact it, but it could not be punitive, you know.
Well,
But that was pretty mild.
Yeah.
It was like $100 that you had to pay
Right,
to be on this
But I mean,
list.
It's daunting. I mean, in the 5, 4, and 600 block, there's 60 retail ground floor locals or rentable spaces. Only 21 out of those 60 are rented. 27 are not. Out of those 27, 18 refuse to lease it out. And then 8 are private and 7 are challenged. Those are dismal numbers. It doesn't matter what kind of grants we have. If we don't have a brick and mortar to put them in, those grants are useless. So it's daunting.
I mean, this is in an area that has a CRA and a DDB. Come on. I mean, and what they're doing is they're not helping, they're strangling our economy.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, maybe I was maybe against this before, but hey, in the last 4 years, a lot of more properties have been bought up and they're doing the same thing. They're just no matter what we do, we can't catch up to it because it's like a dead zone, you know. These people aren't participating in our economic vitality.
And some are harder to justify than others. For example, if it's a fully equipped restaurant, ready to move in,
Exactly.
why would you not rent it? There's no renovations. I mean, like the Jamaican restaurant across the street, Roxy's. These are move-in type of places, and nobody's calls are being returned. Our hands are tied.
Well, the majority of these property owners aren't interested in putting a business in there. They have a different agenda, and that is to stifle the downtown.
Well, exactly, or one queue to be able to put the right tenant in when they're prompted. But you know what?
Well, they've had 7 years for a queue, you know.
I know. I'm just saying, I get so discouraged when I see this. And I can remember, and here I go again, saying I can remember when Clearwater was a vibrant community. It's been a long time, but I can remember it because when I was growing up here, I was proud of this community, and now there must be something we can do sitting on this dais, and I don't know what it is. I mean, I would have to depend on what legally we can do, but I think we have an obligation to try to do something to stimulate this economy.
Well, and I was going to ask too, along the lines, like for future discussions, I'd like to have a presentation, maybe from economic development or something, and maybe after the first of the year, but I'd like to know where we stand with our business diversity and how many new businesses are coming in each month, or how many might be leaving. I'd like to know how we're courting those businesses, what does it look like, and how that economic development department's going to work shoulder to shoulder or whatever with our CRAs. So we have 2 CRAs now. And so what is it going to look like to revitalize Clearwater, especially the downtown, bring new businesses into our North Greenwood CRA? What are the measurables? What are those goals? Because I remember, when Amanda Thompson was here, it was like, what do we anticipate? How many new, storefronts do we want to fill? Is it 10 in the next year or whatever? And, we just haven't had solid targets or reports on how we're doing to reach those targets. And what does that effort look like? And do they need more resources to make that happen?
Well, the number of places we could put people in have diminished just because what Councilman Shada said. I mean, they aren't on the market anymore to have anything done with them. And is there anything we can do as council to force that to happen?
It's private property rights.
I know, but they're in a
The nuclear option
commercial
would be
downtown area.
eminent domain, but is that even feasible in certain areas?
Eminent domain can be used if we have a public purpose. So, I mean, if there is actually a municipal objective, for example, if we need government offices, or if we want to put a park or a library or something that we were operating, that can be done. Affordable housing can also be an option, not directly by the city, but the Clearwater Housing Authority could actually exercise that authority on the housing side. Other than that, it's pretty limited. We would not be able to use eminent domain for what I would call traditional commercial redevelopment, such as retail, offices, or things like that. But if there's public purposes, if there's a parking garage the city wants to build downtown, or something that is actually a legit public purpose, then yes, I mean, that tool goes back to the founding of our republic, and it is absolutely something that could be used if there's an actual public purpose behind it.
And if the parking garage had retail on the bottom floor, would that still be considered, public?
I'd have to look into that. I would not want to answer that from the dais, at least not off the top of my head. So it's something I'd have to look into. But certainly, I would say that the state of Florida is very property rights oriented, and state law is very favorable to property owners. And certainly, I would say the legislature has made it so that eminent domain is, by design, a last resort for cities and counties. And so if that's a process that the city's interested in exploring further, there's quite a bit that goes into it to go down that path. But it can be done, again, if there's actual appropriate public purposes to support it. It's not a panacea for private redevelopment. It's designed for government purposes, like parking garages, like parking, like right-of-way, like utilities, like a public park, like city offices, things like that.
Well, most cities don't have to deal with an organization like Scientology, whose leader is, should be charged with racketeering, creating a problem that only he can solve. I've gone to the FBI about this. I've tried talking to the state attorney. No one is interested in helping us with it. But it is, it just seems criminal that they're doing this to spite us, to have something over our heads, for Miscavige to get what he wants.
Okay, any other discussion, any other new business? That it? All right. Good meeting, we'll see you all Thursday night.